Every Christmas, my family meets at my parents' house. It's the one time we all come together. This year, my parents told me not to come. They said things would be easier if I stayed home. No fight, no drama, just distance. I don't know what changed, but I can't stop wondering if I did something wrong, or if they simply stopped wanting me around. The road to his parents' house always looked the same in December. Narrow, dark, and lined with trees that seemed to close in the deeper he drove. Snow flurried in gentle bursts across the windshield, blurring the old street lamps into halos of gold. The hum of the tires was the only sound beneath the soft croon of a Christmas station on the radio. Yet this year, Daniel wasn't driving down that road. He was sitting alone in his apartment, lights off, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the black glass of the television. Enjoying the story? Hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel. He hadn't been invited. The message had come 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning, when the sky was still gray, and his coffee was still hot. His mother had called, the sound of her voice familiar and distant, all at once. She'd said it gently, almost tenderly, as though she were afraid to press too hard. "Danny," she'd begun, "your father and I think maybe this year you should just stay home. Things are a little complicated right now. It would be easier if you didn't come." He'd waited for an explanation, but none came. No fight, no argument, just that word. Easier. Now sitting in the stillness of his living room, Daniel replayed that conversation again and again, searching for what he'd missed. He'd tried to call back, of course. His father didn't answer. His sister, Elise, had texted him once. "Hey, can we talk later?" And then never followed up. The more he tried to reach them, the quieter everything became. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had changed. Shop windows glowed with garlands and fake snow. The sound of carolers drifted faintly through the alleyways. Daniel watched the world prepare for Christmas like it always did, except this time, he wasn't part of it. He poured himself another glass of whiskey, the ice clinking sharply in the silence. His apartment was small, but neat. The tree in the corner, a fake one he'd used every year since college, stood undecorated. The box of ornaments sat unopened beside it, like a promise he couldn't keep. He tried to tell himself it didn't matter, that it was just one Christmas. Families get tired, schedules change, things happen. But beneath that logic, an ache gnawed at him. Quiet, unrelenting. What had he done wrong? He thought back to last year, when he'd stood in the same living room, packing his suitcase for the drive home. His parents' house had been full of noise, laughter, arguments, clinking glasses. His mother baking pies until the kitchen filled with the smell of cinnamon. His father outside, shoveling snow and humming off-key. Nothing unusual, nothing broken. So why this sudden fracture? By the third night, the silence felt unbearable. He picked up his phone again, scrolled through his messages. His thumb hovered over his sister's name. He typed, then deleted, then typed again. Did I do something? He stared at the blinking cursor, then sent it. The message was marked as read within minutes, but there was no reply. He sighed and set the phone down. The heater clicked softly in the background. Somewhere in the building, someone was laughing. A couple probably, watching a movie. For a moment, he considered calling his parents again, but something in him resisted. Pride? Maybe. Fear? The sense that calling would make him smaller somehow, as if begging to be included would confirm what he already suspected, that they didn't want him there. He poured another drink, then another. By midnight, The snow outside had thickened into a quiet curtain. He stood by the window, watching it fall, his breath fogging the glass. He thought about the house he'd grown up in, the one at the edge of the woods where the snow always piled high against the back door. He could picture it perfectly. The yellow light spilling from the kitchen, his mother's silhouette moving between stove and counter, his father sitting by the fireplace with his newspaper. He could even smell the faint mix of pine and smoke that always lingered in the air. But this year, that image felt like something he wasn't allowed to touch. When his phone buzzed, he jumped. The screen lit up. Elise. "Can we talk now?" His fingers moved quickly. "Yeah. What's going on? Why don't they want me there?" It took a moment before the dots appeared. The slow, hesitant typing of someone who didn't know what to say. Then, "I think it's better if you hear it from them." He stared at the message, a frown creasing his face. "What does that mean?" He muttered to no one. He typed back, his words sharper than intended. "They won't tell me anything. I've called. I've texted. They just ignore me. What's happening, Elise?" The dots appeared again, then vanished. Again, then vanished. No message came through. He waited another half hour before setting the phone face down on the table. The whiskey glass was empty. The lights from the city flickered faintly across the walls. When he finally went to bed, he couldn't sleep. The thought circled in his mind like a persistent whisper. Maybe they know something you don't. He dreamed of the house that night. In the dream, he was standing outside it, snow falling thickly, his breath rising in clouds. The windows were lit, laughter echoing faintly from within. But when he tried to step forward, his feet sank into the snow, deeper and deeper, until he couldn't move. Through the frosted window, he could see his family gathered around the table. His mother carving the roast, his father pouring wine, Elise smiling. None of them looked toward the window. None of them seemed to notice him standing there. When he woke, the sun was already up. His phone was silent. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floor. Something inside him hardened. A slow decision forming in the quiet. He'd drive there. He didn't care what they said. He needed to know. By noon, he had packed a bag, just an overnight one, and thrown it into the back seat of his car. The drive to his parents' town was just under 4 hours. He'd made it countless times before. Every holiday, every birthday. The roads would be clear enough if he left now. He texted Elise one more time before leaving. "I'm coming up there. I just want to talk." No reply. The sky hung low and gray as he drove. The world outside the car seemed muted, washed in cold light. As he left the city behind, the buildings gave way to open stretches of farmland and distant clusters of pine. Snow still clung to the edges of the road. With every mile, his chest grew tighter. Not fear exactly, but something close. A quiet awareness that whatever waited for him at the end of this drive, it would change things. By the time he reached the outskirts of his hometown, it was late afternoon. The streets were lined with familiar houses, each one trimmed with lights, wreaths, and the faint smell of burning wood. It should have felt comforting. It didn't. He turned down Maple Hollow Road, the same one that curved past the frozen creek, and led to the house he'd grown up in. The trees grew denser here, their branches heavy with snow, arching over the road like a tunnel. As he drove, he noticed something strange. A car he didn't recognize was parked near the edge of the property. An old blue sedan, half covered in snow. No one was inside. He slowed, peering through the windshield. The house looked exactly as it always had. 2 stories, white siding, a small porch with a single light glowing above the door. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney. For a moment, he almost turned back. maybe this was a mistake. Maybe they really did have a reason. But then he saw movement in the window. His mother's silhouette crossing the living room. His pulse quickened. He parked at the end of the driveway and stepped out. The cold bit sharply at his face. His boots crunched in the snow as he approached the door. He hesitated, hand hovering over the doorknob. Then he knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Through the glass, he could see faint light shifting inside. Then, the soft sound of footsteps. The door opened just enough for his mother to appear in the gap. She looked almost startled, her expression frozen between surprise and guilt. "Danny," she said softly. "Hey, Mom." He tried to smile. "I figured I'd stop by. Thought maybe we could talk." Her eyes flicked past him toward the driveway, as if checking whether he was alone. "You shouldn't have come," she said finally. "Why not? What's going on? You're acting like I did something terrible." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then quietly, she said, "It's not about what you did." "Then what is it about?" Before she could answer, another voice came from deeper in the house, his father's, firm but strained. "Who is it?" His mother turned her head slightly. "It's Daniel." There was a pause. Then his father appeared behind her. Older than Daniel remembered, his hair grayer, his face more drawn. His eyes locked on Daniel with an unreadable expression. "You shouldn't have come," his father said. Daniel's breath formed clouds in the air between them. "I think you owe me an explanation." His father looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "Not here. Come inside." The words should have felt like a relief. They didn't. He stepped into the house. The warmth hit him immediately, carrying with it the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke. The living room was decorated just like always. Garlands over the mantel. Stockings hung neatly. A tree glowing in the corner. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then he noticed something. The family photos on the mantel, the ones that had been there since childhood, were missing. The frames were gone, replaced by small winter ornaments and candles. He frowned. Where are the pictures? His mother's hands fidgeted with the edge of her sweater. "We put them away for now." He looked at her. "Why?" Neither of them answered. He turned toward his father. "What's going on here?" His father's gaze didn't waver. "Daniel," he said slowly, "you need to understand that some things are better left alone. It's safer that way." Daniel let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Safer? What does that even mean?" His mother's eyes flickered toward the window, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't want to worry you. We thought it would pass." What would pass? A sound interrupted her, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere upstairs. A floorboard creaking. Daniel froze. His eyes lifted toward the ceiling. "Is someone else here?" Neither parent answered. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Then from upstairs came another sound, the soft, unmistakable rhythm of footsteps. Someone was moving above them. His father's face tightened. "Daniel," he said, voice low, "you need to leave. Now." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Tell me who's up there." His father's jaw clenched. "Please, just go." But Daniel was already moving toward the stairs. His mother reached out, her voice trembling. "Danny, don't." He didn't stop. The staircase creaked beneath his weight as he climbed. The house was dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the walls. The air felt colder up here, heavy with a faint, unfamiliar scent. Something like old dust and faint decay. When he reached the top, he heard it again. Movement. A door closing softly at the end of the hall. His heart pounded. He took a step forward, then another, the floor groaning beneath him. He reached the door, his old room. He hesitated, hand trembling on the knob. Then he turned it. The door swung open, and Daniel froze where he stood. The door opened on darkness, deep and still, the kind that swallows sound. For a moment, Daniel couldn't see anything. Then his eyes adjusted, and he realized the curtains were drawn tight, shutting out what little light remained from the overcast afternoon. His old bedroom, or what used to be his bedroom, looked changed in ways he couldn't quite name. The posters he'd tacked up in high school were gone. The shelves, once lined with books and half-forgotten trinkets, were empty. But something was there. In the corner beside the old dresser stood a narrow bed he didn't recognize, sheets tucked with careful precision. A single pillow. The faint smell of antiseptic hung in the air. He took a step closer. On the dresser sat a glass of water, half full, and a bottle of pills beside it. The label was turned away. The air was still, yet the feeling of someone else's presence lingered, like a breath held too long. He could feel it on the back of his neck. Then behind him, the floor creaked. He spun around. His father stood in the doorway, face pale, jaw tight. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I told you not to come up here." Daniel's eyes darted between the bed and his father. "Who's staying here?" His father hesitated. "No one." Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "You're lying. There's water, medication. Someone's living here. It's complicated. That's all you've said since I got here. Complicated. Easier. Safer. What the hell is going on?" His father didn't move, but his expression hardened. Some things are better not to see. Daniel took a step closer. "Then why does it feel like I'm the one who's not supposed to exist? Why did Mom tell me not to come? What are you hiding?" His father didn't answer. He just glanced past Daniel's shoulder toward the far corner of the room. Daniel turned slowly. The closet door was open an inch, just enough to show a sliver of darkness inside. A cold pulse ran through him. He walked toward it, each step deliberate. His father's voice came low and sharp behind him. "Daniel, don't." He reached out, his fingers grazing the edge of the door, and pulled it open. Inside, hanging neatly on a rod, were clothes, but not his. Women's clothes. A sweater, a coat, a faded floral dress. The smell of lavender drifted faintly from within, and then he saw it, tucked on the floor beside an old shoebox. A small photo frame turned face down. He crouched and picked it up. It was a picture of him, standing beside a woman he didn't recognize. She was smiling, her arm looped through his. Behind them was a lake, sunlight glinting off the water. But the strangest part wasn't that he didn't remember the picture. It was that the woman's face had been carefully scratched out, deep gouges marring the glass. Daniel stared at it, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. "What is this?" he whispered. His father stepped closer. "Put it down." "Who is she?" "I said put it down." Daniel turned, the frame still in his hand. "Tell me." His father's gaze flickered, and for the first time Daniel saw fear there. Real fear. "You don't remember, do you?" "Remember what?" Before his father could answer, a sound came from behind them. A soft creak, the unmistakable shift of weight on floorboards. Both men froze. It came from the hallway. Daniel moved first, pushing past his father and stepping into the corridor. The air felt colder now, the light dimmer. Down at the far end, the door to the guest room was slightly ajar. He heard breathing, faint, uneven. "Who's there?" he called. No answer. He started down the hallway, his father's footsteps close behind. Each board creaked underfoot, the sound oddly amplified by the silence. He reached the door and pushed it open. The room was empty, but the window stood open, a thin curtain stirring in the draft. Snowflakes had blown in, scattering across the floor. Daniel stepped closer, scanning the yard below. Nothing but snow and the dark line of trees beyond. He turned back to his father. "I'm not leaving until you tell me what's happening." His father looked exhausted now, as though years had settled on him in minutes. "We didn't want to involve you. You've been through enough already." Daniel stared at him. "What does that mean?" His father hesitated. Then quietly, "After the accident." "What accident?" His father stopped himself, pressing a hand to his temple. "You should sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want answers." Before either could say more, his mother's voice echoed from downstairs, sharp, panicked. "Richard! Daniel! Come down here!" They both turned. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, she was standing in the middle of the living room, pale as paper. She was holding something, a photograph, her hands trembling. Daniel's stomach dropped when he saw it. It was the same photo he'd just found upstairs, the one of him and the faceless woman. His mother's eyes darted between him and his father. "Why is this out?" Daniel swallowed. "I found it in my room. Who is she?" For a moment, neither parent spoke. Then his mother's voice came, soft and breaking. "Her name was Emily." "Was?" Daniel repeated. She nodded. She was your fiancée." The word hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her, the sound echoing in his head. "Fiancée." "I was engaged?" His father closed his eyes. "You were. 3 years ago." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No. That can't be right. I'd remember that." His mother's hands tightened around the photo. "You were in an accident, Danny. You hit black ice coming back from the lake house. You both went off the road. You survived." He felt the world tilting, the room narrowing. "And her?" "She didn't." Daniel backed up a step, the words sinking like stones in his chest. He tried to breathe, but his lungs felt tight, his heart a drumbeat of disbelief. "No," he whispered. "I would remember that. I'd remember her." "You lost a lot of your memory," his father said quietly. "The doctor said it was trauma. You spent months recovering. When you came home, we thought it would hurt less to not talk about it. You seemed better, happier. But that doesn't explain why you told me not to come this year," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "Why now? Why all this secrecy?" His parents exchanged a look, one of those silent, wordless glances that pass between people who share a terrible truth. "Because," his mother whispered, "she's back." Daniel blinked. "What?" "She's been here," she said. "We've seen her. At night. Outside the house." He stared at her, disbelief mingling with dread. "You're saying Emily's... what? Haunting you?" His father's jaw tightened. "We don't know what it is. We just know it looks like her. She started appearing a few weeks ago. In the yard. On the porch. Once even by the window. We thought it was our imagination. But then..." He trailed off, his voice shaking. "She came inside." Daniel's mouth went dry. "You expect me to believe this?" His mother's eyes were wet now. "We thought it would stop if you stayed away." A cold silence filled the room. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, a low whistle threading through the walls. Daniel shook his head. "You're both tired, that's all. You're seeing shadows. Grief does that." "We buried our grief years ago," his father said. "This isn't in our heads." He turned toward the window. Snow was still falling, thick and steady. Beyond the glass, the trees loomed dark and unmoving. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw something. A flicker of motion near the tree line. A shape that didn't belong. He blinked. It was gone. The house felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. His mother sank onto the couch, her voice a whisper. She wants something, Danny. Maybe you. Maybe closure. We don't know. Daniel turned away. This is insane. He started toward the door, grabbing his coat. I'm going to get some air. His father stepped forward. Don't go out there. But Daniel was already pulling open the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and bitter. The yard stretched out before him, blanketed in snow, the sky darkening toward dusk. The woods beyond the property seemed to absorb the light, black and endless. He stepped out, his boots crunching in the snow. Behind him, the house glowed softly. Warm, safe. Ahead, the world was silent. He scanned the tree line again, the shadows shifting faintly in the wind. Nothing. Just snow and branches. He took another step forward, then another. And then he saw her. At first he thought it was a trick of the light. The shape of a person half hidden behind the trees. But as his eyes adjusted, the figure became clearer. A woman, standing perfectly still among the snow-laden trunks. His breath caught. She was wearing a long coat, her hair dark, loose. Her face, he couldn't see it clearly, but something about the way she stood made his stomach turn. Hello? He called out. No response. He took a cautious step closer. Are you okay? Do you need help? Still nothing. The woman didn't move, didn't even shift. The wind picked up, carrying a low creak from the branches above. Then slowly, the woman turned her head toward him. Daniel froze. Even from that distance, he could see her eyes. Hollow. Pale. Watching him with a stillness that felt ancient. His heart pounded. Emily, he whispered before he could stop himself. The woman tilted her head slightly, almost curious. Then she stepped forward. One step, then another. Daniel stumbled back, his boots slipping in the snow. No, he murmured. No, this isn't... But before he could finish, the lights from the house behind him flickered. Once, twice, then went out. The yard plunged into darkness. The only sound was the whisper of snow and the slow crunch of footsteps approaching from the trees. For a few seconds, Daniel couldn't move. The cold pressed against his face like a hand, sharp and biting, and the dark seemed to hum with its own quiet pulse. The snow was falling harder now, the flakes larger, heavier, each one blurring the edges of the world. He blinked against the wind, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The figure at the edge of the woods was still there, half lost in shadow, her shape just clear enough to be real. But the more he looked, the less certain he became. Emily. The name slipped out again before he could stop it, like a muscle memory. The sound of it on his tongue felt strange, familiar and foreign all at once. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head slightly, as though listening for something beyond him. The gesture was slow, deliberate. Then, without warning, she stepped backward into the darkness, and the trees seemed to close around her. Daniel's breath fogged in the air. He took a step forward, snow crunching beneath his boots. The cold stung his eyes. Wait, he shouted. Come back. But there was no reply. Only the whisper of wind and the soft hiss of snow against the earth. Behind him, the house loomed, its windows dark now, the warmth gone, as if the power had been swallowed whole. He turned back toward it, unease spreading like frost along his spine. Something about the silence felt wrong. He walked quickly toward the porch, every instinct telling him to get back inside, to find light. to find his parents. But as his hand reached for the doorknob, he paused. Through the thin crack beneath the door, he could see a faint, flickering glow. Candlelight. He pushed the door open slowly. The living room was dim, the air heavy with wax and smoke. His mother stood near the fireplace, a single candle trembling in her hand. His father was by the window, staring out toward the trees. "Power's out," his mother said softly without turning. "It happens sometimes, when the snow's heavy." Daniel closed the door behind him. "She's out there," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, calm, but trembling beneath the surface. "I saw her." His father turned. The lines on his face looked deeper now, carved by worry. "What did you see exactly?" "I don't know. A woman, standing by the trees. She looked—" He stopped himself. The word dead felt wrong in his mouth. She looked like her. His mother's eyes filled with tears. The candlelight trembled. "Then she knows you're here," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" His father crossed the room and began checking the locks on the doors, one by one, the old brass deadbolts clinking shut. "It means she's been waiting." Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane. You're talking like this thing, whatever it is, has a mind." His father didn't look up. "It does." A faint sound came from upstairs. A soft thud, followed by the slow groan of old floorboards. Daniel froze. His mother's candle wavered in her hand. "She's inside," she whispered. Before he could respond, the sound came again, clearer this time. A slow, dragging step, then another. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. "No," he said. "That's not possible. All the doors are locked." But the footsteps continued, steady and unhurried, moving down the upstairs hallway. His father grabbed the fireplace poker, his knuckles white around the handle. "Stay here," he said, starting toward the stairs. Daniel stepped in front of him. "You're not going up there alone?" The two men exchanged a look, not of courage, but of grim understanding. The air in the house seemed to shift as they climbed. Each step groaned, echoing too loud in the quiet. The candlelight from below flickered faintly against the walls, their shadows stretching long and thin. When they reached the landing, the sound had stopped. Daniel's father motioned toward the far door. His old room, the one where they'd found the picture. The door stood half open again. They approached slowly. The air grew colder the closer they got. A chill that crept under Daniel's skin. He could see his breath now, misting faintly in front of him. His father pushed the door wider. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the glass of water still sitting untouched on the dresser. But the closet door, which Daniel had left open earlier, was now closed. His father tightened his grip on the poker and stepped forward. Daniel reached out and grabbed his arm. "Wait. Listen." At first, there was nothing. Then faintly, they heard it. A whisper. Barely audible, like the rustling of fabric. Daniel's stomach twisted. The whisper came again, softer this time, a thread of sound that seemed to form a word. His name. Daniel. It came from the closet. He stepped back instinctively, his hand brushing against the dresser. The picture frame still lay there, the woman's scratched-out face catching the candlelight. His father raised the poker, and in one swift motion, yanked the closet door open. The light from the hallway spilled in, revealing nothing. Just the hanging clothes, swaying slightly as though touched by a breeze. They both stood there, breathing hard, waiting for something to move. But the room was still. Then, suddenly, a sound burst through the silence. The sharp ring of Daniel's phone from downstairs. Both men turned. It rang again, echoing through the house. Daniel swallowed hard. I left it on the table. His father nodded toward the stairs. Go. I'll check here. Daniel hesitated, then turned and headed down. Each step felt slower, heavier. The phone kept ringing, its sound unnervingly steady. When he reached the living room, the candle his mother had been holding was gone. The flame had been set down on the coffee table, flickering beside the phone, which lay vibrating against the wood. He picked it up. The screen glowed faintly in the dark. The call was coming from an unknown number. He hesitated, then swiped to answer. Hello? For a moment there was only static, then, faintly, a voice, his own. You shouldn't have come back. Daniel froze. Who is this? The line crackled, the voice distant but unmistakable, his own tone, his own cadence, like a recording of something he didn't remember saying. She's not done with you. The call ended. The screen went black. A wave of cold rolled through him, and before he could think, something else caught his eye. The reflection in the window. A shape standing behind him. He spun around, heart slamming against his ribs. No one. Just the faint shimmer of candlelight and the empty room. Then his father's voice came from upstairs, sharp, urgent. Daniel, get up here. He sprinted back to the stairs, taking them two at a time. When he reached the landing, his father was standing in the hallway, eyes wide, pointing toward the far end. The guest room door was open, and faint light spilled from within. Look, his father said hoarsely. Daniel stepped forward. Inside, on the nightstand, sat a candle, one that hadn't been there before. Its flame flickered weakly, casting soft shadows across the walls, and next to it lay something small and metallic. Daniel approached slowly, his stomach tightening. It was a locket. He picked it up carefully, the chain cold against his fingers. The clasp was old, slightly rusted. He opened it. Inside were two photographs. One of him, smiling. The other of the woman, Emily. This time her face wasn't scratched out. He stared at it, his throat dry. She wore this, he murmured. I remember this. His father's voice was low. You remember? Bits and pieces flickered behind his eyes. Laughter near the lake, her hand in his, the way she tilted her head when she smiled. Then just as quickly, the images slipped away, leaving only a hollow ache. Why would it be here? Daniel whispered. His father didn't answer. His gaze had shifted toward the window. Daniel followed his eyes and felt the air leave his lungs. There outside the glass stood the woman again. Closer this time. Her face was pale, almost luminous against the dark. Her eyes locked on his. Daniel's breath caught. Dad? His father stepped forward, but before he could reach the window, the candle's flame flared, a sudden, violent burst of light, and went out. The room plunged into darkness, and then the sound came. Soft, measured footsteps on the porch below. She was at the door. The wind pressed against the house in long, groaning breaths. The sound of footsteps on the porch stopped, then started again, slow, deliberate. Daniel and his father stood frozen in the upstairs hallway, listening as each step settled like a heartbeat. Downstairs, the door creaked. Daniel's father gripped the poker tighter, but Daniel moved first, rushing past him. He took the stairs two at a time, the shadows shifting around him as the candles guttered in the draft. When he reached the bottom, the front door stood slightly open, snow curling across the threshold. Beyond it, nothing but white. He stepped forward cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily? The wind answered for her. Then something else, a faint, rhythmic sound from the yard. Not footsteps now, but a low hum. He followed it. The world outside felt suspended, the snow glowing faintly beneath the overcast sky. At the edge of the trees, the humming stopped. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then a whisper threaded through the cold, "Daniel!" He turned sharply. She was there, 10 feet away, standing in the snow. This time, her face was clear. She looked exactly as she had in the photographs. Eyes bright, lips pale, hair moving gently in the wind. No rot, no ghostly distortion. Just Emily, alive in every detail except for the impossible stillness in her gaze. Daniel's throat tightened. "You're not real." "I am," she said. Her voice sounded like a memory. Fragile, echoing, close enough to touch. "You promised you'd come back." He shook his head. "You died." She stepped forward. "You said you'd never leave me alone out there." Daniel felt his chest constrict. Images pressed at the edge of his mind. Headlights on black ice, the car spinning, water breaking through glass. A scream cut short. He stumbled backward. "I tried to save you." Emily tilted her head, and for the first time he saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not anger, but sorrow. "You did," she whispered, "but you didn't save yourself." The air seemed to thicken. "What are you talking about?" "You never woke up, Daniel." The words hung there, soft but immovable. He frowned, shaking his head. "That's not—" But then the world shifted. The snow under his feet rippled like water. The trees bent and blurred. The house behind him flickered, its windows glowing too bright, then dimming to nothing. The wind stopped. He turned toward the porch, but there was no porch now, no house. Just the frozen lake, its surface cracked and silver beneath the gray sky. Daniel's breath hitched. He recognized it. The lake house they'd rented that winter, 3 years ago. The same one from the photograph. His boots crunched on the ice as he turned slowly in place. Emily stood across from him, her coat stirring in the faint wind. "You keep coming back here," she said. "Every year. You knock on their door. You wait for them to answer." "No," he whispered. "I drove here. I saw them. They talked to me. They remember you," she said gently, "but not the way you think." He looked down at the ice beneath him and saw his reflection for the first time. His skin was pale, almost translucent. His breath a thin mist that didn't fade. The truth came not as a jolt, but a slow, sinking realization. The accident hadn't left him alive at all. He remembered now. The skid, the sound of metal twisting, the cold water swallowing him whole. He'd seen the headlights of another car rushing past as everything went black. He hadn't survived. And every December since, he'd been coming back here. To the house, to the memory, replaying a life that no longer existed. The parents he'd spoken to, the phone that had rung, even the locket in his hand. Echoes. Pieces of what he couldn't let go. He looked at Emily, tears freezing on his lashes. "Why did you bring me back?" Her expression softened. "I didn't." "You did." The wind stirred again, scattering snow across the ice. "I thought they didn't want me anymore," he said, voice breaking. "They moved on," she said. "You couldn't." She reached out a hand. "You don't have to keep doing this." Daniel looked past her, toward the faint outline of the old house beyond the trees. He could almost see the warm light in the windows, his parents moving through the rooms, unaware of the shape that sometimes appeared at the edge of the woods, the echo that waited for an open door. He stepped closer to Emily. "If I go with you, you'll rest," she said. He hesitated, then nodded. Her hand was cold when it touched his, but the cold felt right somehow. Clean, final. The ice beneath their feet shimmered, and the sound of the wind faded into something softer. The hush of snow falling on still water. For a heartbeat, Daniel looked back. The world behind him was already dimming. The trees, the lake, the faint outline of the home that wasn't really his anymore. Then he turned to her, and together they stepped forward. The ice broke with a sound like a sigh, and the two of them dissolved into the light beneath. Silence returned to the woods. When morning came, the sky was clear. The snow around the lake was untouched, except for two faint impressions that led to the water's edge, and stopped. Inside the house, Daniel's parents woke to a stillness they couldn't explain. The lights flickered once, then steadied. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter, as though something heavy had finally lifted. His mother opened the curtains and looked out across the snow. A faint smile crossed her face, unbidden and unexplained. She turned to her husband. "It feels different today," she said quietly. He nodded, though he didn't know why. "Yes," he said, "it does." And somewhere, in the echo between memory and forgetting, Daniel let go. There are stories that end in understanding, and others that fade in silence. Daniel's truth lived somewhere between, a reminder that what we hold on to can bind us tighter than the things we lose. When love becomes a promise we refuse to release, even the living can haunt themselves. So now, when the snow falls outside your own window and the lights flicker for reasons you can't name, ask yourself, what memories do you keep returning to? What promises have you left unfinished? And if the past ever knocked once more on your door, would you open it? In high school, I had a teacher who believed in me when no one else did. 10 years later, I learned he was fired for crossing boundaries with students. I can't reconcile the person who encouraged me with the one described in those accusations. Do I defend him? Or accept that the person who helped me might not have been who I thought he was? The town of Briar Hollow slept beneath a ceiling of low gray clouds, the kind that never quite rained, but always looked as though they might. On weekday mornings, the streets carried the scent of dew and diesel, coffee and damp leaves. A few cars passed through Main Street, their tires hissing on the wet asphalt, while the flickering neon of Harper's Diner blinked against the fog. It was the sort of town that pretended time hadn't moved on, with its single movie theater, rusting gas pumps, and school built long before most of its residents were born. Eli Grant had not planned to come back. 10 years was long enough to forget the smell of the gym floor wax, the echo of bells that never seemed to stop ringing, the sound of lockers slamming in rhythm like some mechanical heartbeat. But now he was back, 30 years old, a writer who hadn't written much in years, standing outside the school that once felt like both his prison and his sanctuary. He told himself it was just curiosity, that coming home was temporary. His mother's old house needed clearing, and nostalgia was a poor excuse to delay it. Yet beneath that, something else tugged at him. A name he'd read 3 weeks earlier, printed in the small, tired font of the local newspaper. Daniel Whitmore dismissed for inappropriate conduct with students. Eli had read the article twice, then again, slower. The words were brief, cold, factual. They said he had been terminated following allegations of boundary violations. That phrase, boundary violations, was one of those clinical terms that meant everything and nothing. He didn't want to believe it, couldn't. Daniel Whitmore had been Eli's English teacher during his senior year. A quiet man, in his late 30s back then, who spoke softly, but carried a sort of gravity that made people lean in when he talked. He was the first adult who ever told Eli he had a voice worth listening to, who stayed after class to read his stories, who told him he should write, that he needed to. Eli still remembered the day Whitmore had said, "Don't chase approval, Eli. Chase honesty, even when it scares you." Those words had kept him going through college, through the lonely years when writing was the only thing that felt like home. So reading about Whitmore now, about allegations, felt like learning gravity had been a lie all along. He found himself parked outside the high school on a Wednesday afternoon, engine idling, rain beginning to bead on the windshield. The building hadn't changed much. Red brick, white columns, a cracked concrete path lined with maples turning orange too early. He saw students spilling out, laughing, their voices distant under the drizzle. Eli didn't know what he expected to find there. Closure? Clarity? Maybe just proof that the past still existed. When the last few students drifted away, he got out of the car and walked toward the old oak tree by the side of the building. The one where Whitmore used to sit during lunch breaks, a paperback always open in his lap. The bench beneath it was gone, but Eli could still picture him there. Elbows on knees, lips moving silently as he read. He turned as the janitor, an older man with a weathered face and a mop handle in hand, stepped out from the side door. "School's closed, son," the man called out. Eli nodded. "Just looking. I used to go here." The janitor squinted, then frowned. "You one of Whitmore's kids?" The question startled him. "Yeah," Eli said quietly. The janitor exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "Hell of a mess, that one. You hear what happened?" "I read something." "Then you didn't hear half of it," the man muttered, leaning on his mop. "Some say he crossed lines with one of his students. Others say it was all rumor. Small town like this, rumor grows faster than truth." Eli hesitated. "Do you know what really happened?" The janitor shrugged. "Only that the board called it misconduct, and that he left town before they could make it official. Just packed up and disappeared one night. No one's seen him since." Eli thanked him and walked back toward his car, but something in that exchange stayed with him. That last word, disappeared. Whitmore wasn't the sort to run. He was measured, deliberate, maybe too much so. Running didn't fit. That night, Eli stayed in his mother's empty house, a creaking structure at the end of Birch Lane that smelled of dust and lavender. He found the old boxes still stacked in the living room, covered with years of disuse. But it wasn't the house that kept him awake. It was memory. He remembered Whitmore's classroom, the way sunlight hit the bookshelves in late afternoon, the hum of the old fan that never worked right. He remembered how the man used to pace when he talked about literature, eyes alive with quiet passion. "Stories," he'd said once, "aren't about truth or lies. They're about what we're willing to believe." Eli had never forgotten that line. And now, lying in the dark, he wondered if he'd misunderstood it entirely. The next morning, he drove into town, past the diner, past the library where he'd spent hours as a teenager. Inside, the librarian, Mrs. Carson, looked up and smiled faintly. "Eli Grant," she said, "back from the big city." "Something like that," he said. "What brings you around? You writing about Briar Hollow again?" He hesitated. "Actually, I was wondering if you remember Mr. Whitmore." The smile faded a little. "Everyone remembers Mr. Whitmore." "Did you know him well?" She tilted her head, well enough to know he was different. Thoughtful. Maybe too close to his students sometimes, but he cared. "I always believed that." "What do you mean, too close?" She lowered her voice. "He had favorites. Always did. Kids who reminded him of himself, maybe. You were one of them." Eli looked down. "Did anyone ever say he did something?" Mrs. Carson sighed. "You know how towns like this work. Someone says something, it spreads, and suddenly there's no telling what's true. I just know one of the girls from his class left school early. Her parents made a lot of noise. Then he was gone. Do you know her name? She hesitated. Clara Hensley. The name rang faintly in Eli's mind, though he couldn't place it at first. Clara, quiet, brown-haired, always sitting near the window. She'd been a year younger than him. They'd barely spoken. He thanked Mrs. Carson and left the library, a growing unease curling in his stomach. By the time dusk fell, the fog had rolled back in, draping the town in a soft gray veil. He sat in his car outside the old Hensley house, staring at the porch light flickering in the distance. The windows were dark, but there was movement inside. A shadow crossing, pausing, gone. He told himself he'd just knock, ask a few questions, satisfy his curiosity. But as he walked up the path, the front door opened before he could raise his hand. A woman stood there, mid-20s now, hair shorter, sharper eyes than he remembered. "Clara?" he asked. She blinked. "Eli Grant?" He nodded awkwardly. "Yeah, I used to be in your class." "I remember. I was wondering if we could talk about Mr. Whitmore." At that, something shifted in her expression. Not anger, not fear, but something brittle, restrained. "Why?" she asked. "Because I knew him too. And I don't understand what happened." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "5 minutes," she said. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and cedar. There were boxes stacked in the corner, papers scattered on the table. She moved quietly, like someone used to silence. "Everyone in town has their own story," she said finally, sitting down. "Some think he was a saint. Others think he was a monster. The truth's somewhere between." Eli leaned forward. "Did he hurt you?" Clara's gaze flicked up sharp. "That's not a question you should ask like that." "Sorry," he said. "I just need to know who he really was." She looked away, voice softening. "He was kind, brilliant, but he knew how to make people trust him. That's the part no one talks about, how easy it was to feel special around him, like he saw something in you that no one else did." Eli nodded slowly. He knew that feeling all too well. Then one day, she said, it stopped feeling right. He'd stay late after class, say things that sounded like compliments but weren't. He'd ask about my life, personal things. I told myself it was fine because he was a teacher, and teachers care. But then, she trailed off. Then I realized he wasn't talking to me like a student anymore. Eli felt his stomach tighten. "Did you tell anyone?" She nodded. "My parents. They went to the school board. After that, everything changed. People stopped talking to me. The girls whispered. The teachers looked away. And he just left." Silence filled the room like a pulse. Eli finally said, "I don't know how to believe that. Not because I don't believe you, but because the man I knew doesn't fit that picture." Clara gave a small, tired smile. "That's the problem, isn't it? He made sure everyone saw what they wanted to see." When Eli left the house, the night had grown darker, colder. The fog had swallowed the street lamps, leaving only a faint glow through the mist. He stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing. The man who once told him to be brave with the truth now existed in two versions. One that saved him, and one that broke someone else. As he walked back to his car, a sound made him pause. Behind him, from somewhere in the fog, came the faint echo of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, keeping pace with his own. He turned. Nothing. But when he got into the car and glanced in the rearview mirror, he could have sworn he saw a figure, just beyond the edge of the light, standing by the oak tree, watching. The next morning broke with a pale metallic light, that turned the fog into a dull sheet of silver across the streets of Briar Hollow. Eli sat by the kitchen window, his coffee cold, the paper untouched beside him. He hadn't slept much. Not since the night before. Not since he saw that figure by the oak tree. Maybe it was nothing. Just the way fog plays tricks on tired eyes. But part of him felt watched, as though the town itself had eyes now, whispering behind its curtains. He scrolled through old contacts on his phone, found no one left from those days worth calling. His mother's absence hung heavy in the quiet, the walls still lined with photographs of a life that felt like someone else's. He caught sight of one photo near the stairs, his high school graduation. Whitmore in the background, smiling, clapping. A flash of pride in his expression, the kind that once meant the world to Eli. Now he wasn't sure what that smile had ever meant. Later that day, he drove to the local newspaper office. The Briar Hollow Gazette still occupied the same squat brick building near the courthouse, its windows yellowed with age. Inside, the place smelled of paper and stale coffee. Behind a cluttered desk sat a man in his 50s, balding, reading through a stack of local announcements. "Excuse me," Eli said. "I'm looking for information on a story you ran a few months ago, about Daniel Whitmore." The man looked up, eyes narrowing. "You're not with the board, are you?" "No, just a former student." The editor sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. "We only printed what the district released. Statement said he was let go after a complaint. That's all we were allowed to publish." "Do you know what happened to him?" "Not exactly. Heard he sold his house a week later. Some folks say he moved west. Others think he's hiding out somewhere near the lake." "The lake?" The editor shrugged. "Old property out there. Used to belong to his uncle, I think. He was seen near there before he vanished." Eli felt that word again. Vanished, like an echo from the janitor's mouth. Everyone said it the same way, as if Whitmore had been swallowed whole by the town itself. He thanked the man and stepped back outside, the sky now heavy with rain. He could smell it before it started, the damp, earthy promise of a storm. The lake wasn't far, maybe 15 minutes north along the winding back roads past the tree line. He hadn't been there since high school, when Whitmore had taken their class for a poetry retreat. He remembered how the air had smelled of pine and wet stone, how Whitmore had told them that silence was the most honest language. Driving out now, the forest seemed thicker than he remembered, the branches crowding the narrow road, leaves brushing the roof of his car. Rain began to fall in slow, deliberate drops that grew heavier by the minute. The lake appeared suddenly, a pale mirror beneath the gray sky. The road ended at a dirt path, and just beyond it stood a small cabin, half hidden among the trees. Its windows were dark, but the porch looked swept, the wood still clean. Someone had been here, maybe recently. Eli hesitated, then stepped out, rain soaking through his jacket. He knocked once on the door. Silence. Then from inside, a sound, faint, like the creak of a floorboard. "Mr. Whitmore?" he called out. Another sound, a chair scraping. Then the door opened a few inches, a sliver of dim interior visible through the crack. A voice came, low, cautious. "Who is it?" "It's Eli," he said, heart pounding. "Eli Grant." The pause that followed felt like a lifetime. Then the door opened wider. Whitmore stood there, older, thinner, his once dark hair now flecked with gray. His face looked tired, hollowed out, but the eyes were unmistakable. They carried the same sharpness, the same calm weight. "Eli," he said quietly, "I thought you were in New York." "I was." "What are you doing here?" Eli struggled for words. I read what happened. I needed to see you." Whitmore exhaled, stepping aside. "Come in, then. You might as well get out of the rain." The cabin was small but meticulously kept. Books lined every surface, stacks of old papers and journals piled near a cold fireplace. A kettle sat on the stove, unlit. There was a sense of stillness here. Not peace exactly, but pause. Eli sat while Whitmore poured tea into chipped cups. The silence between them was dense, filled with unspoken years. "I didn't think anyone from back then would come looking for me," Whitmore said finally. "I had to. You changed my life, you know. You were the reason I started writing." Whitmore smiled faintly. "I remember your stories. They were raw, honest. You had something rare." "Then why did you leave?" Eli asked. "Why didn't you fight back?" The older man's expression hardened. "You think anyone listens once an accusation like that hits a small town? They wanted a name, a scapegoat. It didn't matter what I said. Clara Hensley said..." Whitmore's gaze sharpened. "Clara said many things, some of them true, some twisted by fear and gossip. I never touched her, Eli. Never crossed that line." Eli studied him. His voice was steady, his eyes unwavering, the same calm authority that once commanded a classroom. Yet something in it felt too rehearsed, too deliberate. "You believe me, don't you?" Whitmore asked. Eli hesitated. "I want to." Whitmore nodded slowly, as if he expected that answer. "That's more honest than most." Rain lashed harder against the windows. The cabin felt smaller by the minute. "You said you read about it," Whitmore continued. "Did you read what happened afterward?" "The girl left town. Her parents divorced. Her father drank himself into ruin. I wasn't the only life that fell apart." Eli looked down. "Then why disappear?" "Because once they've decided what you are," Whitmore said softly, "you become it. Whether it's true or not." The fire crackled faintly, the only sound between them for a long while. Then Eli asked, "If you didn't do it, why not clear your name?" Whitmore smiled faintly, without mirth. "Because innocence doesn't sell papers, Eli. Scandal does." Eli wanted to believe him, needed to, but Clara's words kept echoing. He knew how to make people trust him. After an hour, Eli left, promising to come back. As he stepped into the rain, Whitmore called after him. "Eli," he said, his tone suddenly softer, "be careful what you dig for. The truth isn't always the thing that sets you free." Driving back through the storm, Eli couldn't shake the unease. Every word Whitmore had spoken felt deliberate, shaped to reach him. And yet, the man's exhaustion, the quiet ache in his eyes, it didn't feel like guilt. It felt like something heavier. Back in town, the power flickered. The streetlights buzzed, the storm winding through the valley like a restless animal. Eli pulled into the diner, needing something warm, needing to think. Inside, the place was half empty. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile brought him coffee. He was halfway through it when a voice came from the booth behind him. "You went to see him, didn't you?" Eli turned. Clara sat there, coat damp, hands clasped around her cup. "How did you—" "Small town," she said. "News travels fast when ghosts come back." He stared at her, unsure whether to apologize or defend himself. "You think you can find something I missed?" she asked. "Some piece that makes it make sense?" "I just want the truth," he said. Clara nodded slowly. "Then you should know something. The night he left, I went to his house. I wanted him to deny it to my face. But when I got there, he was already gone." The front door was open. There was a note on the table. "A note?" She nodded. It said, "Forgive me." Nothing else. Eli felt the words like a weight settling in his chest. Maybe that's not guilt, he said quietly. Maybe it's regret. For what the town did. For what you lost. Or maybe, Clara said, her voice steady, it's exactly what it sounds like. They sat in silence for a long time, the storm pressing against the windows. When Eli finally left the diner, he walked out into the rain, mind spinning. The wind had dropped, but the air felt heavier now, like the world was holding its breath. He started the car, headlights slicing through the dark. As he pulled onto the road, he saw something, just for an instant, in the rearview mirror. A figure, half hidden by rain, standing under the street lamp, watching him. The same as before, the same stillness. He braked, heart pounding, turned, but the street was empty. Only the sound of rain and the whisper of trees. He sat there for a long moment before driving off, the road ahead twisting into shadow. But when he got home, he found something waiting for him on the front porch. A small, rain-soaked envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, torn from an old notebook. The handwriting was unmistakable. Neat, slanted, deliberate. It read, "You shouldn't have come back. Some stories aren't yours to finish," and at the bottom, a single initial. D. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind a world washed pale and still. Eli sat at the kitchen table, the envelope lying in front of him, its edges curling as it dried. He had read the message a dozen times, each reading turning the same simple words into something heavier. You shouldn't have come back. He told himself it was a prank. Maybe someone at the diner saw him talking to Clara. Maybe word spread. Small towns had long memories and short patience. But the handwriting, that was what unsettled him most. It was Whitmore's. He would have sworn to it. He found one of his old notebooks in a box by the window. The one from senior year. Notes from English class. Fragments of stories Whitmore had marked with faint pencil strokes in the margin. He compared the two samples under the lamp's dull light. The loops of the letters, the neat, deliberate slant. Identical. But Whitmore couldn't have left it there. He'd been at the lake. Eli had seen him, spoken to him. Unless... A shiver traced his spine. He checked the front porch again, but there were no footprints on the damp wood. Only the faint scent of rain and pine. When daylight came, he couldn't sit still. He drove aimlessly through Briar Hollow, the town half waking around him, people sweeping their porches, the diner sign flickering, kids in hoodies walking to school. Everything looked ordinary, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being slightly out of sync, as if the world had tilted while he wasn't looking. He parked by the school again. The oak tree loomed against the sky, stripped of most of its leaves. He watched it for a while, remembering the way Whitmore used to stand there during recess. Coat collar turned up. A figure, both part of and apart from the world around him. He wondered what he had really seen in the man. Wisdom, or just the reflection of his own need to be believed in. The school doors opened, and a woman stepped out. Someone he didn't recognize. Younger than Whitmore had been, maybe early 30s, carrying a folder under one arm. She noticed him sitting there and hesitated before walking over. "Can I help you?" she asked. Eli got out of the car. "Sorry, I used to go here. I was just remembering." She smiled politely. "I'm guessing you're one of Mr. Whitmore's old students." He blinked. "You knew him?" "I took over his classes after he left." Her expression softened. "Everyone still talks about him sometimes. Depends who you ask, though, whether that's good or bad." "Do you think he was guilty?" She tilted her head, studying him. That's not a question with a clean answer. Did you ever meet him? Once. When I was hired, he left a box of his old lesson plans. There was a note inside, actually, for whoever came next. What did it say? She smiled faintly. Just one line. The stories we tell are only as true as the person remembering them. Eli froze. The phrase crawled under his skin. Do you still have it? He asked. She nodded. In my desk, somewhere. Could I see it? Her brows knit slightly, but after a moment she said, Sure. Come by tomorrow. I'll dig it out. He thanked her and walked back to the car. The sky was clearing now, the last scraps of cloud drifting toward the hills. But his thoughts were heavy. That line, as true as the person remembering them, felt like a message meant for him. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The house made its usual noises. Wood settling, wind against the eaves, but every sound felt amplified, personal. Around midnight, he went upstairs to his old bedroom. The wallpaper was peeling, the floor cold under his feet. On the desk sat the old typewriter Whitmore had given him as a graduation gift. He hadn't touched it in years. He brushed the dust from it and sat down, almost without thinking. The metal keys felt strange, heavier than he remembered. He rolled in a blank page and typed a single sentence. I don't know what's real anymore. The machine answered with a soft echo of clacking metal. He kept typing. Not a story, not even sentences. Just fragments. Questions. Memories. The sound filled the silence, steady, hypnotic. Then he stopped, because when he looked at the page, he saw words he hadn't typed. Do you? He stared, heart hammering. The letters were faint, slightly crooked, as if typed by a different hand. He tore the page out, crumpled it, threw it aside, told himself it was just an old ribbon ghosting the page, leftover impressions from years ago. But when he replaced the sheet and tried again, his hands trembled. The next morning, he found Clara waiting outside the house. You look terrible, she said. Did you leave that note? He asked. She frowned. What note? He showed her the envelope. She read it and shook her head. Not me. Then who? Probably someone trying to scare you off. People here don't like the past being dug up. I think it was him. She stared. Whitmore? Eli. You said he's at the lake. I saw him. Talked to him. He's alive. Something flickered in her eyes. Confusion. Maybe fear. That's not possible. Why not? Because he's dead, she said quietly. They found his car in the lake the week after he disappeared. It was in the paper. The words landed like ice in his stomach. No, he whispered. I saw him. I talked to him. She looked at him with something like pity. Then I don't know who you talked to. Eli turned away, his breath coming shallow. The world felt like it had tilted again. That afternoon, he drove back to the lake, every curve of the road sharper than before. The rain had washed the air clean, leaving the smell of wet pine. When he reached the clearing, the cabin stood just as before. But this time, the door hung open. Inside, the air was still. Dust floated through the slats of light. The kettle was cold, untouched. The books lay exactly as they had, but the teacups were gone. There were no footprints, no sign anyone had been there in weeks. He called out Whitmore's name, but his voice only echoed back at him. Then he saw the notebook on the table. It was one of Whitmore's, the same brand he used in class. He opened it carefully. The first few pages were lesson notes, familiar quotations. Then, halfway through, he found his own name, over and over, scrawled, crossed out, rewritten. And beneath it, a single phrase. He still doesn't remember. The edges of the page were smudged with water or something darker. Eli's hands shook as he turned the next page, but it was blank. He backed out of the cabin, heart pounding, the air too thick to breathe. The forest seemed to close around him, the trees pressing closer, the lake dark and glassy behind him. By the time he reached the car, the sun had begun to set. He drove back to town without seeing the road, mind spinning. He still doesn't remember. What was he supposed to remember? At the house, he poured himself a glass of water, but his hands trembled so badly it spilled. The note, the typewriter, the voice that seemed to follow him. They circled each other in his thoughts like vultures. He picked up the phone and called the editor at the Gazette again. "You said they found Whitmore's car in the lake?" "That's right," the man said. "Empty, though. No body." "When was this?" 10 years ago. "Was there anything else? Anything in the car?" The man hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "Please." After a moment, the editor said, "They found a box of papers. Mostly lesson plans, letters from students. One of them had your name on it, actually. But it was water damaged, unreadable." Eli felt the floor tilt again. "You kept it?" "Police did. It's probably still in the evidence room." After he hung up, Eli sat in silence, the shadows of the room deepening around him. There was a sound from upstairs, faint, like something sliding across the floor. He looked up. Another sound, the creak of a door opening. Slowly, he climbed the stairs, the boards groaning under his weight. The hallway stretched long and dark, lined with photographs that seemed to watch him pass. At the end stood his bedroom door, slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The typewriter sat on the desk, exactly where he'd left it. But the sheet of paper in the roller was no longer blank. 4 words stared back at him in neat, slanted handwriting. "Stop trying to remember." The ribbon was dry. The keys hadn't moved. Eli backed away, breath catching. Downstairs, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He opened it. A photo. Blurry, taken from outside the house. His silhouette in the upstairs window. And beneath it, a single text. "Some stories are safer unfinished." The next day dawned unnaturally still. No wind, no sound of birds. Just the low hum of the town breathing somewhere beyond the window. Eli sat on the edge of the couch, the message on his phone glowing faintly in his hand. Some stories are safer unfinished. He stared at it until the screen dimmed, then powered off the phone. The quiet afterward felt deeper, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. He should have left. Packed his bags, driven until Briar Hollow disappeared in the rearview mirror. But instead, he found himself thinking of the one thing that hadn't yet fit. The box of papers pulled from the lake. The letter with his name on it. By noon, he was standing in the sheriff's office explaining that he was researching an old case, Whitmore's disappearance, and asking if he could see what was left of the evidence. The deputy at the desk looked doubtful, but finally agreed to check. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying a small water-stained box sealed in clear plastic. "This is all that was logged," she said. "Be careful. It's fragile." Inside were soggy folders, old essays, a few photos of the lake, and near the bottom, a thick envelope with his name scrawled across it in faded ink. Eli Grant. His heart pounded as he pulled on gloves and carefully lifted it out. The paper was warped, but the seal still intact. "Mind if I make a copy before you take it?" the deputy asked. "I'm not taking it," he said. "I just need to read it." He sat down at a small metal table, the overhead light buzzing faintly. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside were several pages, some half erased by water, others still legible. "Eli, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you the truth myself. I tried to keep you separate from all of it. From me. From what this place does to people. But maybe it's too late for that. Eli's chest tightened. The handwriting was Whitmore's. Sharp, deliberate. You once told me that stories are how we survive. That's why I stayed so long, because teaching them was the only way I could still believe in them. But stories also have power, Eli. They can be used to make someone remember things that never happened. Or to make them forget the things that did. He paused, reading the next line twice. You think you know what I was accused of? You don't. It wasn't the girl they wanted to ruin. It was me, and they used what I cared about most to do it. The ink blurred there, but he could still make out fragments. They told you to forget. You agreed. His pulse thudded in his ears. The room seemed to tilt. You were the one who came to me that night, Eli. You said you remembered what they'd done to you. And then they made you forget. They always do. He read it again and again, his mind refusing to form meaning from the words. You okay? The deputy asked from behind the counter. He looked up, eyes unfocused. Yeah, he said. Fine. He folded the pages back into the envelope, hands shaking. Outside, the sun had gone pale, bleeding through a thin veil of cloud. The whole town felt smaller somehow. The streets narrower. The houses leaning inward. He drove without direction, the letter burning in his pocket like a live wire. They told you to forget. He pulled over near the old school. The building was closed for the weekend, empty and silent. The oak tree loomed in its usual place, branches like veins against the sky. He got out, walked to the base of it, and ran his hand across the rough bark. The wind stirred faintly through the leaves. The first breath of movement all day. His thoughts spiraled back. Late afternoons in the classroom, the hum of the projector. Whitmore's calm voice saying, "Write what you're afraid to say out loud." What had he been afraid to say? He tried to summon the memory, but it came in flashes. A late evening in the classroom, the light gone gold, Whitmore at his desk, a conversation about truth and lies, and something else, the sound of his own voice breaking, words he couldn't recall. Then darkness. He stepped back, dizzy. A whisper cut through the stillness. Not loud, not clear, just his name, carried on the breeze as if someone were standing just behind him. He turned. No one there. But when he looked back at the school's windows, he saw a reflection that froze him. A man standing behind him, older, gaunt, the outline unmistakable. Whitmore. Eli spun around. Empty air. When he looked again, the reflection was gone. He stood there until the shadows lengthened and the streetlights flickered on. Then he drove home. The house was dark, the air heavy with that same stillness. On the table lay the typewriter, waiting. The last page still bore the words, "Stop trying to remember." He sat before it, heart pounding. "Fine," he whispered. "Then I'll finish it." He rolled in a fresh sheet of paper. His fingers hovered over the keys. And then, a sound. One key pressed itself down, slow and deliberate, as though an invisible hand had moved it. A single letter appeared, D. He froze, breath shallow. Another key pressed, then another. Do you remember now? He staggered back, the chair toppling behind him. The room seemed to pulse with quiet energy. The walls, the floor, the machine alive with something unseen. He stumbled for the door, flung it open. The night air hit him like cold water. He ran down the steps, across the yard until he reached the street. And there, under the street lamp, he saw him. Whitmore, still as stone, his face half-shadowed. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Eli's voice broke into the stillness. "What do you want from me?" For a long moment, no answer. Then Whitmore stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "To finish what you started," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried. "You wanted to tell the truth. You just didn't want to remember it." "I don't understand." Whitmore tilted his head. "Don't you?" Eli blinked, and suddenly the street was empty. No Whitmore. No voice. Only the echo of it inside his head. When he turned back toward the house, he saw light in the upstairs window. His old room. The typewriter still clacking. Slow. Steady. By the time he reached it, the paper had filled with words. Sentences, fragments. Pieces of something larger. His own handwriting. Not typed. Written, somehow, in pen. The last line read, "The story ends when you stop looking for the truth." And underneath, faintly etched into the paper, "Thank you, Eli, for remembering." The ribbon was empty. The typewriter still. He stood there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in. Then he walked outside, down to the edge of the road. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, the first drops beginning to fall. He looked toward the woods, toward the lake. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure there. Tall still, just at the edge of the trees. Then the rain thickened, and it was gone. When morning came, the typewriter sat empty. The last page lay on the desk, white and untouched. No words, no message. As though the story had never been written at all. How much of what we remember is truth, and how much is the story we've chosen to keep? When someone shapes our belief in ourselves, do we ever truly see them, or just the reflection of what we needed them to be? If a memory can be rewritten by time, by guilt, by fear, then where does truth live? Maybe it's not in the facts or the evidence, but in the quiet places we avoid, the questions we refuse to finish writing. And maybe the real story, the one we never tell, is the one that never lets us go. When my mother was in the hospital, she told me something she'd been hiding for decades. That my father isn't my biological dad. She made me promise not to tell him. Now he's planning a family trip, talking about our bloodline, and every word feels like a lie I'm helping maintain. Do I protect her secret? Or destroy the illusion of our family? The hospital smelled like disinfectant, an old fear. The kind of place where light felt sterile and silence pressed against your ribs until you forgot how to breathe. Daniel sat in the chair by his mother's bedside, the vinyl squeaking every time he shifted. Machines hummed their mechanical lullabies, blinking in steady rhythm, the artificial heartbeat of the room. Outside, a drizzle tapped against the window, thin gray lines racing each other down the glass. The world beyond seemed distant, almost suspended, as if the hospital existed in a time bubble separate from everything that mattered. His mother, Elaine, looked small against the white sheets. Once she'd been the kind of woman whose laughter could fill a room. Now her voice was a whisper barely strong enough to stir the air. Her eyes, though, were sharp as ever. They fixed on Daniel with a kind of desperate clarity that made his stomach twist. "Danny," she murmured, the syllables dragging through her dry throat. "There's something you need to know." He leaned forward, forcing a smile that felt like a lie. "Don't talk now. The doctor said you need rest." She lifted a trembling hand, silencing him. "No, not later. There isn't much later left." The words hit him harder than he expected. His throat tightened, but he nodded. She looked past him, as though watching something only she could see. Then she said it, the words that would burn themselves into the rest of his life. "Your father isn't your real father." For a long moment, there was no sound but the beeping of the heart monitor. It felt like the entire room tilted slightly off balance. He almost laughed. Some reflex of disbelief, some defense against how absurd it sounded. But the look on her face wasn't the kind you could mistake. It wasn't guilt. It was sorrow so deep, it looked permanent. "What are you talking about?" he finally whispered. "I should have told you years ago," she said, her voice cracking. "But your father, John, he loved you so much. And I couldn't bear to destroy that. He doesn't know. No one does." He sat back, staring at her, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Who is he then?" "My real—" Her hand found his. The skin was paper thin, veins like blue threads. "It doesn't matter. It was a mistake. One night. A long time ago. I was young. I thought your father and I were finished back then. And then, when I found out I was pregnant, John took me back without question. He thought you were his. He's never doubted." She paused, breath catching. "Promise me you won't tell him." The rain outside intensified, streaking the window in silver veins. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came. "Please," she said again, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Promise me." He looked at her, really looked at her. The way you look at something you're afraid to lose. Her eyes were pleading, the same shade of green as his own. And that realization hurt more than anything. He nodded slowly. "I promise." Her hand relaxed. She closed her eyes, a faint smile touching her lips, as if she'd finally laid down a burden she'd carried for decades. But Daniel's world didn't shift. It cracked. That night, after she drifted to sleep, he walked the empty hospital corridors, his reflection stretching thin in the polished floors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Every step echoed back at him like an accusation. He kept hearing her voice. "He's not your father." When he finally reached the parking lot, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. He leaned against his car, staring at the steering wheel, unsure where to go. The city lights blurred behind the streaked windshield, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely untethered. The drive home was silent. The wipers kept a slow rhythm against the glass, like a clock counting down to something inevitable. He pulled into the driveway of his childhood home, the house with the blue shutters that John had painted every summer, the one where every memory suddenly felt false. The porch light flicked on automatically, bathing the yard in gold. Inside, the faint glow of the television flickered through the curtains. John was still awake. Daniel hesitated, his hand on the door handle, before finally stepping inside. His father sat in his recliner, wearing that old faded flannel robe, a bowl of popcorn in his lap, watching some nature documentary, with the volume too low. He turned when he heard the door, his face breaking into a smile that was too pure for what Daniel knew now. "Hey, kiddo. How's Mom?" Daniel froze for half a second, then forced a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. She's okay. Tired. Good. John's voice carried that familiar warmth, the one Daniel had taken for granted his whole life. "She's a fighter." He nodded, unable to meet his father's eyes. John turned back to the screen, his laughter filling the room when a lion chased down a zebra. "Nature, huh? No matter what happens, life finds a way." Daniel swallowed hard. Except the truth, he thought. He went upstairs, closing his bedroom door behind him. Everything looked exactly as it had since he was a teenager. The posters, the books, the framed photo on his desk. Him and John fishing by the lake, both grinning with sunburned noses. He stared at that photo for a long time, trying to find any hint, anything that proved it was a lie. But there was nothing. And that made it worse. When he finally crawled into bed, sleep refused to come. His mind kept circling back to one question that grew heavier with every passing hour. Who was he? Days turned into weeks. His mother recovered slowly, though the secret hung between them like a shadow neither dared mention. Daniel found himself avoiding long visits. Every time she looked at him, guilt twisted in his chest, not just hers, but his own. He had promised. And yet, every word from his father's mouth now felt like a knife turned sideways. John didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to. He went on talking about the family trip he'd been planning for months. A road trip across the country, retracing old roots from when Daniel was a boy. Just the two of us, he'd said, eyes shining. Like old times. One last adventure before you get too busy being a grown-up. Daniel forced a laugh. Sure, Dad. Sounds great. But inside, he was breaking. The night before they were set to leave, he stood in his room packing a bag. The sounds of the house muffled around him. Downstairs, John hummed an old tune while checking the car tires. The ordinary rhythm of their lives went on. But it all felt wrong now. He opened his desk drawer, digging through old keepsakes, until he found the photo again. That fishing trip. Behind it, tucked away in the corner, was a small envelope. His mother's handwriting on the front. For Daniel, if something happens to me. His pulse jumped. He stared at it for a long moment before tearing it open. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain everything. Please believe that what I did out of love. Your father, John, is the best man I've ever known, but I was young once, foolish, and I made a mistake. I never wanted that mistake to define your life. If you need to know who he was, his name was Thomas Hale. Daniel read it 3 times. The name felt like a wound reopening with every repetition. He sat there for nearly an hour staring at it, until John called up from downstairs, his voice cheerful and unaware. Ready to hit the road, kiddo? Daniel folded the note, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. When he came down, John was waiting by the door, keys in hand, the same smile he'd worn for years. The kind of smile that could still make Daniel feel 10 years old again. And as they stepped out into the morning light, Daniel wondered how long a promise could survive under the weight of a lie. The morning air was crisp when they pulled out of the driveway. The sky washed in pale blue and streaked with the promise of sunlight. The old Ford pickup rumbled down the street, its engine coughing like it needed coffee to wake up. The house shrank in the rearview mirror, taking with it the illusion of safety that had always lingered there. John drove with one arm resting casually on the wheel, his window cracked open, letting in the scent of damp earth and early dew. The radio played an old rock station, songs from the era when he and Elaine had fallen in love. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, watching the road roll out in front of them, his thoughts tangled in the letter folded in his jacket pocket. He'd read it again before they left, hoping that the words might somehow change, might soften, or explain away what they meant. But they didn't. They were as sharp as ever. "You sure you packed everything?" John asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Daniel replied quietly. "Good. I thought we'd take the scenic route up through the mountains. Might take a little longer, but the view's worth it." "Sounds good." John smiled and tapped the steering wheel in rhythm with the song. "You know, I was thinking, we should stop by Lake Marin again. Remember that fishing trip we took when you were, 12? You caught that monster trout, biggest damn fish I'd ever seen." Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, I remember." He remembered the photo, the one still framed in his room. He remembered John's laughter, the smell of the lake, the way the sun had turned everything gold. He remembered believing that moments like that were forever. They drove for hours, past rolling hills and small towns that looked half asleep, gas stations with peeling paint, diners that smelled of bacon and old coffee. John talked almost the entire way. About work, the house, the neighbor who kept stealing his newspapers. He spoke like a man who didn't know his world was built on a lie. Daniel answered when he could, his voice steady but distant. Every now and then, John would glance over, his brow furrowing, like he could sense something off but couldn't name it. By the time they stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, the tension between them hung so thick it was almost visible. The diner was small. Red vinyl booths, chrome trim, the smell of fried food clinging to the air. A waitress with a tired smile poured them coffee before they even ordered. John unfolded the menu, his glasses sliding down his nose. "You want the usual?" Daniel nodded. They sat there, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. John's voice softened when he finally spoke. "She's doing better, you know. Your mom. The doctor said her lungs are strong, and she might be home in another week or two." Daniel looked up from his plate, the coffee bitter on his tongue. "That's good." John smiled faintly. "You know, when you were little and she got sick once, you used to bring her those awful crayon drawings you did. She kept every single one." He chuckled. "Said they made her feel like she couldn't die because you'd be too disappointed." Daniel looked down at his cup, tracing the rim with his thumb. "She's always been good at hiding things." John didn't catch the weight behind the words. He just nodded. "Yeah. Strongest woman I know." Outside, a truck rumbled past, shaking the windows. The sound lingered between them like thunder before a storm. They finished their meal mostly in silence. When the check came, John insisted on paying. Like always. And Daniel didn't argue. He just followed him back to the truck, the heat of the afternoon pressing down like a heavy hand. Back on the road, the scenery changed. The mountains began to rise in the distance, sharp and gray against the fading light. The highway curved through forests where sunlight filtered through leaves like shards of green glass. John hummed under his breath, some old tune from before Daniel was born. His voice was off-key but warm. Daniel watched the landscape roll by, but his mind wasn't on the road. It was on a name. Thomas Hale. He had tried searching the name online the night before, but there were too many results. Too many possibilities. None that made sense. None that matched the ghost his mother had painted in her few broken sentences. And yet, the more he tried not to think about it, the more the name clawed at him. As the sun dipped lower, John slowed the truck and pulled over at a scenic overlook. The valley below stretched endlessly, a patchwork of pine and shadow, the river glinting like liquid glass in the distance. "Come on," John said, stepping out. "You've got to see this." Daniel followed, the air crisp and cool against his skin. The world below looked almost unreal, too perfect, too still. John leaned on the railing, eyes distant. "You know, when I was your age, I used to drive out to places like this just to think. Life was simpler then." He chuckled softly. "But it's funny, isn't it? How we think we know where we come from, what makes us who we are. And then something happens, and suddenly it all looks different." Daniel's heart skipped. He looked at his father sharply. "What do you mean?" John turned, smiling faintly. "Oh, nothing dramatic. Just life, you know? You grow up thinking your parents are perfect, and then you realize they're just people, trying their best." Daniel nodded slowly, but his chest tightened. They stood there a while longer, the wind tugging at their jackets. Then John sighed. "Come on. Let's get to the motel before it gets dark. They drove the last few miles in silence. The motel was small, sitting just off the highway. A row of rooms lit by flickering neon, the kind of place where time seemed to pause. Inside their room, the air smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. John tossed his bag on one bed, groaning as he sat down. Getting old, kiddo. My back's not built for long drives anymore. Daniel smiled faintly. You've been saying that for 10 years. Yeah, well, it's truer now than it was then. He lay back, closing his eyes. Tomorrow, we hit the lake. You can finally show me you still remember how to fish. Daniel nodded, though he doubted he'd sleep. When John began to snore softly, Daniel slipped outside, the cool night air washing over him. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like broken glass. He walked to the edge of the parking lot, phone in hand, and typed the name again. Thomas Hale. Dozens of results appeared, but one caught his eye. Thomas Hale. Obituary. 1997. Local teacher survived by his wife. No children listed. The town name, Ridgeway. Less than 2 hours from where they were now. Daniel's heart pounded. He clicked the link, the dim light of the screen painting his face pale blue. The photo was grainy. A man in his 30s. Brown hair, kind eyes. Something about him made Daniel's stomach twist. The angle of his jaw, the faint dimple when he smiled, echoes of himself. He read the short paragraph twice. Dead. Nearly 30 years ago. He stared at the image, the edges of reality blurring. If that was his biological father, then his mother had been carrying that secret since before he was even born. And she had buried it with a dead man's name. He closed the browser and slipped the phone into his pocket, breathing hard. Somewhere behind him, a door opened. John stepping out in his robe, squinting into the dark. Hey, he said softly. Couldn't sleep either? Daniel swallowed, trying to steady his voice. Yeah. Just getting some air. John nodded, joining him by the railing. You used to do that as a kid too. Whenever something was on your mind, you'd stare at the sky like it had answers. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe it still does. John chuckled. If it does, it's keeping them to itself. They stood there for a while, side by side, both looking up at the same indifferent stars. Then John said quietly, You know, I've been meaning to tell you something. Something about when you were born. Daniel turned sharply. What about it? John's eyes stayed on the horizon. You came early. Your mom went into labor 2 weeks before her due date. I remember because I was out of town. Had to drive 5 hours back to make it to the hospital. By the time I got there, she was already holding you. He smiled faintly. And I thought I'd never seen anything so perfect. Daniel's breath caught. 2 weeks early. He did the math automatically. Not because he wanted to, but because his mind wouldn't stop turning. John looked at him, his face soft in the glow of the parking lot light. You know, some people spend their whole lives wondering if they'll be good parents. I never did. From the moment I saw you, I just knew. Daniel looked away, his throat tight. You've never doubted that I was yours? John frowned slightly. Why would I? The question landed like a stone. Just wondering, Daniel said quickly, forcing a smile. You know how kids are. John's eyes lingered on him a second longer than usual. Then he nodded, satisfied. Get some rest, kiddo. Long day tomorrow. He went back inside, the door clicking shut softly behind him. Daniel stood there for a long time, the sound of insects filling the night. He stared at the stars until his vision blurred, the question burning deeper with every breath. Would it be better to keep the illusion or destroy it? When he finally went inside, John was already asleep, one hand resting on the photo of Elaine he always kept by the bed. The picture's frame was cracked in one corner, but the glass still caught the light, glinting faintly like a secret. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He could hear his father's soft breathing, steady and sure. For a moment, he almost convinced himself none of it mattered. That love was enough, that the truth was unnecessary. But in the dark, truth doesn't disappear. It waits. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering against the windows. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled over the mountains, low and distant. It sounded like the start of something coming, something that couldn't be stopped. The next morning broke gray and cold, the kind of light that made everything look washed out, like the world hadn't fully woken up yet. A fog clung to the mountains, drifting low over the road as the truck climbed higher toward the lake. John was unusually quiet, hands firm on the wheel, eyes set ahead. The radio was off. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. Daniel watched the fog swallow the trees outside. The landscape looked ghostly, skeletal pines rising from the mist, the road curling like a ribbon of wet steel. Every now and then, the truck's headlights caught flashes of water through the haze, the lake glimmering in the distance like a secret trying to stay hidden. When they finally reached the lookout, John parked near the same worn trail that led down to the pier. "Doesn't look much different," he said, stepping out. His voice carried in the still air, oddly hollow. "Even smells the same." The scent of damp wood and pine needles hit Daniel as soon as he opened the door. He remembered it instantly. That sharp, earthy smell, the call of distant loons, the creak of the old pier beneath his feet. They unloaded the fishing gear, moving in silence broken only by the crunch of gravel and the occasional sound of water lapping the shore. The lake stretched wide and calm, a mirror of the fog above it. "Feels like time stopped here," John said softly, almost to himself, like the world forgot this place existed. Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, it does." They worked side by side, baiting hooks, casting lines into the still water. For a while it almost felt normal, the rhythm of the past echoing faintly between them. But under the surface, tension pulsed like a current. Every time John spoke, every time he laughed or made a small joke, Daniel could hear his mother's voice whispering behind it. "He's not your father." After nearly an hour, John reeled in his line and leaned back against a wooden post. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking a lot about family lately. What it means. What it doesn't." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Yeah?" John nodded. "You grow up thinking blood makes you family. That's what my father always said. But I don't know if I ever really believed him." Daniel's throat felt dry. "Why not?" John shrugged. "Because love's the only thing that lasts. Blood doesn't remember, but love does." He smiled faintly, eyes crinkling. "Guess that sounds sentimental, huh?" Daniel shook his head, voice quiet. "No, it doesn't." A long silence followed. The fog began to thin, revealing the far side of the lake, dense forest stretching into the hills. John checked his watch. "You want to hike up to the old cabin before it gets dark? I heard they rebuilt it a few years back." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." They packed the gear, stowed it in the truck, and started up the narrow trail that wound through the pines. The air was cool and smelled of wet moss. The deeper they went, the quieter it got, until the only sound was the soft crunch of their boots and the occasional rustle of leaves. Halfway up the trail, Daniel caught a glimpse of something. An old wooden sign, half buried in the earth. Letters faded, but still legible. "Hale Cabin, private property." He froze. John walked a few steps before noticing. "You okay?" Daniel nodded quickly. The though his heart was pounding. Yeah, just thought I saw something. He stared at the sign again. The name, Hale, carved into the weathered wood, nearly erased by time. It couldn't be coincidence. They reached the top of the hill a few minutes later. The cabin stood near the waterline, rebuilt, but still carrying the bones of the past. Same porch, same sagging roofline. A faint breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of cedar and something faintly metallic, like rust. John stepped onto the porch, testing a loose board underfoot. Huh. Looks almost new. Guess someone's been taking care of it. Daniel scanned the surroundings, unease crawling up his spine. The windows were dark, but one curtain shifted slightly, as if stirred by more than just wind. You think anyone lives here? He asked. Doubt it, John said. Place has been abandoned for decades. Probably some park rangers keeping it from collapsing. He peered through the window, cupping his hands against the glass. Looks empty. Daniel walked around to the side, noticing a faded plaque near the doorframe. The engraving was almost gone, but he could just make out a few words. In memory of Thomas Hale. His breath caught. John didn't notice. He was already walking toward the lake, calling back over his shoulder. You coming? Daniel's voice came out faint. Yeah. He followed slowly, the plaque still burning in his mind. His pulse hammered as the questions returned in waves. Why was the cabin named for the same man from the obituary? Why was it here? The very place John had chosen to visit, seemingly by chance. Down by the water, John skipped a stone across the surface. You know, he said, your mom and I used to come here before you were born. Back when we still thought we had all the time in the world. Daniel froze. You and Mom came here? John nodded. Yeah. First summer we were dating. She loved this place. The world seemed to tilt slightly, a sick realization crawling through Daniel's thoughts. This was her place. His place. Their secret. He turned toward John, studying his face. The lines, the weariness, the quiet sadness that had always lingered behind his eyes. For a moment, Daniel wondered if his father, already knew. Dad, he said softly, how did you know about this cabin? John looked at him, surprised. What do you mean? It's kind of out of the way. You said you used to come here with Mom? Yeah. He paused, frowning slightly. Why? Daniel hesitated. Nothing. Just curious. But inside, his thoughts were racing. They stayed there until the sun began to sink, turning the lake copper and gold. Then they headed back to the truck, the air cooling fast. John drove in silence this time, his eyes distant, hands tight on the wheel. At the motel, they ordered takeout and ate in near silence. John seemed lost in thought, and Daniel couldn't tell if it was the same thought that haunted him. Later that night, when John went to shower, Daniel pulled the envelope from his jacket again. The paper felt softer now, worn from being unfolded so many times. He read the line again. If you need to know who he was, his name was Thomas Hale. He looked up at the wall, where their fishing photo hung slightly crooked. His father's smile, his own reflection in the same grin. He whispered under his breath, "Who are you, Thomas Hale?" When John came out, steam followed him, curling through the room like smoke. You all right? He asked. Daniel nodded. Yeah, just tired. John gave him a long, searching look, then turned off the lights. Big drive tomorrow. Get some rest. But sleep didn't come. Hours passed. Rain started again, tapping gently against the window. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, long and mournful. Daniel finally sat up, heart pounding. He couldn't shake it. The sign, the plaque, the name. He pulled out his phone and searched again, this time narrowing it by location. Thomas Hale, Ridgway, Lake Marin. One result, a newspaper archive. He opened it. The article was short, dated August 1997. Local man dies in boating accident. Witnesses report capsized vessel near Marin Lake. Victim identified as Thomas Hale, 34, of Ridgway. Survived by wife, Elaine. Daniel's breath caught, his vision blurred. Wife, Elaine, his mother. He read it again, hands shaking. Survived by wife, Elaine. That was impossible. She had told him it was a mistake. One night. But this meant it was more. A marriage, a life before John. He scrolled further. The last line was short but damning. Authorities ruled the death accidental. No foul play suspected. He set the phone down, his mind spinning. No foul play suspected. The words clung to him like a whisper he couldn't unhear. He looked at John's sleeping form, peaceful, steady, unaware. But what if he wasn't unaware? The thought came uninvited, dark and sharp. What if he had known all along? What if the trip wasn't nostalgia, but a reckoning? Daniel lay back slowly, staring into the dark. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the window. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. He closed his eyes, but the image wouldn't leave him. The plaque on the cabin, the name, the article, his mother's trembling hands in that hospital bed. There were too many lies now to tell where one ended and another began. He didn't sleep at all. When morning came, John was already dressed, packing up the truck. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and clear. Thought we'd head into town before we drive back, John said, cheerful again. Grab breakfast. Maybe check out the old Ridgway Museum. Heard they've got a new exhibit on local history. Daniel hesitated. Ridgway? Yeah, it's not far. Half an hour, tops. The same town from the article. He forced a nod. Sure. They drove in silence, the sun rising over the hills, casting long shadows through the pines. Ridgway appeared suddenly. A quiet town tucked between mountains and lake, its streets lined with brick buildings and old storefronts. The museum sat near the square, small, with a white sign out front, and a bell that jingled when they entered. The air smelled faintly of dust and pine polish. John headed for a display about early settlers. Daniel wandered farther, drawn toward a wall lined with framed newspaper clippings. And there it was, the same article. Thomas Hale, boating accident, 1997. A photo of the lake, and another of a small funeral service. The caption read, "Beloved teacher and husband remembered by wife Elaine Hale." Daniel felt the floor tilt beneath him. Behind him, a voice spoke softly. Terrible thing that was. He turned. An older man stood there, wearing a museum volunteer badge. You remember it? Daniel asked. Oh, sure, the man said. Whole town does. Poor guy drowned out on the lake. His wife, sweet woman, was there when it happened. Shocked her something awful. She moved away not long after. Daniel's heart hammered. She was there? The man nodded. Yeah. They said the boat tipped during a storm. Nobody saw it happen. By the time they found him, it was too late. John appeared from the next room, smiling. Find something interesting? Daniel froze, caught between two worlds, the lie he'd lived in and the truth clawing its way out. He forced his voice steady. Just old news. John smiled faintly. History's full of that. But there was something in his tone, something Daniel couldn't name. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the museum windows. The bell above the door jingled softly, though no one entered. The past, it seemed, wasn't done with them yet. The road back from Ridgway wound through the mountains in long, empty curves. Clouds moved low across the sky, heavy and gray, pressing against the earth as if the weather itself could sense the weight between them. Neither of them had spoken since leaving the museum. John drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the narrow strip of asphalt ahead. His jaw was tight. Every few minutes he cleared his throat like he might say something, then didn't. Daniel stared out the window, the trees blurring past. His reflection looked pale in the glass, ghost-like, as if even his face didn't belong to him anymore. The letter in his pocket felt heavier now, like it had grown teeth. He couldn't stop replaying the old man's words in his head. His wife was there when it happened. Elaine had been there. She'd seen Thomas die. She told Daniel it had been a mistake one night, a moment of weakness. But that wasn't true. She'd been married to him. She'd buried him. The silence in the truck stretched until it felt like a living thing. Then John finally spoke. "You're quiet today." Daniel's voice came out hollow. "Just tired." John nodded slowly, eyes on the road. "You ever notice how people say that when they're really thinking too much?" Daniel didn't answer. John's voice softened. "I saw you looking at that article back there." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What article?" "The one about the accident." John's grip tightened on the wheel. Thomas Hale. Daniel froze. The hum of the engine suddenly felt deafening. John's eyes flicked toward him. "You want to tell me why you were so interested in him?" I just thought it was strange, that's all." John nodded slowly, his jaw working. "Yeah, strange." He paused, then said quietly, "Your mother and I used to come up here after it happened. She said it helped her move on." Daniel turned sharply. "Move on?" John nodded. "You didn't think I didn't know, did you?" The words landed like a gunshot. Daniel stared at him. You knew?" John sighed, his face lined with exhaustion. "I knew she'd been married before. She told me when we first started seeing each other. I didn't know all the details, not then. Just that her husband died in an accident. That's all she ever said." Daniel could barely breathe. "And you didn't care?" John laughed softly, bitterly. "Care? Of course I cared. But love makes you do strange things, Danny. Makes you forgive, even when you shouldn't." The truck rounded a curve, the lake appearing briefly through the trees, its surface dull and colorless under the gray sky. John's voice dropped lower. "What I didn't know was that she was already pregnant when we got back together." Daniel's chest went cold. You knew that?" "I suspected." John's eyes stayed on the road, his tone even, too even. "She told me she wasn't sure, but I did the math. I just didn't ask. I didn't want to know." Daniel couldn't look at him. The trees outside blurred into green streaks. "Why not?" "Because it didn't matter." John's voice cracked slightly. "I wanted a family. She wanted to forget. You were the chance for both." The truck's tires hummed against the wet pavement. For a moment, Daniel thought that was it. The truth laid bare, raw and unfixable. But then John said something that twisted everything again. "I went to see him, you know, before he died." Daniel turned sharply. "What?" John nodded. "Thomas Hale. I drove out here the night before the storm. She didn't know. I just wanted to talk. To tell him to leave her alone, to let her have her life." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Funny thing about pride, it always gets you hurt." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What happened?" John's eyes darkened. "We argued. Out there by the dock. He said he loved her. Said she still loved him. He laughed in my face." The wind picked up outside, shaking the branches overhead. John's voice dropped to a whisper. I shoved him. Just once. He fell. Hit the side of the boat. I tried to pull him out. I swear I did. But the storm came in fast, and he slipped under. Daniel felt his whole body go numb. The sound of the road faded away until all he could hear was the blood rushing in his ears. John looked at him, eyes glistening. I never told her. She thought it was an accident. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. The words hung in the air like smoke. Daniel couldn't speak, couldn't move. John sighed heavily, turning back to the road. I've lived with it all these years. I thought maybe if I loved you enough, if I raised you right, it would balance out somehow. But guilt doesn't fade, Danny. It just finds new shapes. They drove in silence for a long time. The world outside grew darker as clouds rolled in again. Daniel finally whispered, "Why are you telling me this now?" John smiled sadly. "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because your mother isn't going to tell you hers." Daniel turned toward him, voice shaking. "What do you mean?" John didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed ahead. "You should call her," he said finally. "Ask her what really happened that night." He pulled the truck to the side of the road, the engine idling low. "We're here." Daniel looked around. They were back near the overlook from before. The same one where John had said life finds a way. The fog had returned, thicker now, swirling across the asphalt like smoke. John turned off the engine and stared out at the valley. "I think this is as far as I go, kiddo." "What?" John smiled faintly, that tired, familiar smile. "You'll understand soon." Before Daniel could speak, John opened the door and stepped out. The air was cold and wet, the sound of the wind loud in the trees. "Dad," Daniel called, climbing out after him. "What are you doing?" John walked toward the edge of the overlook, stopping just shy of the railing. "You remember what I said about love?" Daniel's chest tightened. "Dad, stop." John turned, eyes soft. "It's the only thing that lasts. Blood doesn't remember." He smiled faintly. "But love does." Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, old, creased, and yellowing. He handed it to Daniel. "This is from your mother," he said quietly. "She gave it to me years ago. Said to give it to you, and the time felt right." Daniel's hands shook as he took it. The paper felt brittle, fragile. John looked at him one last time. "I'm sorry, Danny." Before Daniel could respond, John stepped back, over the edge. "Dad!" The word tore from his throat, raw and broken. He lunged forward, but the fog swallowed everything. There was no sound, no splash, only silence. He screamed again, voice cracking against the emptiness, but the mountain gave nothing back. For a long time, he stood there, wind tearing at his clothes, the envelope crushed in his fist. His legs finally gave out, and he sank to his knees on the cold asphalt, shaking. The letter slipped from his hand and landed beside him. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, washing mud across the road. When he finally opened the envelope, the ink had begun to blur, but the words were still legible. "My dearest Daniel, if you are reading this, it means the past has finally caught up to us. I loved two men in my life, one who gave me stability and one who gave me chaos. Your father, John, loved me, even when I didn't deserve it. Thomas was something else, wild, untamed. I didn't leave him. He left me. That storm took more than a husband. It took the part of me that believed in honesty. I don't know what John told you, but please, my son, don't hate him. What happened on that lake wasn't just his doing. We were all guilty. We all pretended to move on. You are the only good thing that came from all that pain. I kept the truth from you because I wanted you to have a simple love, untainted by what we did. maybe I was wrong. Maybe you deserve to know that every person you love will one day hurt you, but love them anyway. Because love, even broken, is still the only thing worth carrying. Mom Daniel read the letter twice, rain dripping from his hair onto the page. The ink bled and ran, smearing her final words until they looked like tears. He looked out over the fog-covered valley, his father's voice echoing in his head. Blood doesn't remember, but love does. And for the first time, he understood. He didn't know if John had jumped to escape his guilt or to free him from it. He didn't know if his mother's silence had been protection or cowardice. All he knew was that he was the last remnant of both their sins. The storm passed. The sky cleared slowly, revealing streaks of sunlight breaking through the mist. The world felt impossibly still. Daniel stood, clutching the letter to his chest, and whispered into the wind, "I forgive you." The echo came back softer, as if the mountain itself exhaled with him. He turned toward the truck, the world around him silent except for the wind and the soft rustle of leaves. When he looked back at the overlook, there was nothing. Just empty air, fog, and the sound of water far below. He didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later, when he finally saw his mother again, when the weight of 2 lifetimes of secrets broke free inside him. But for now, he drove. The road wound down the mountain, each curve carrying him farther from what he knew and closer to something else. Not peace, but understanding. As the valley opened before him, sunlight spilled across the road, catching on the wet pavement. For a moment, it looked like the world was burning clean, and maybe, in a way, it was. Later, in the quiet of a hospital room where his mother slept once more, Daniel sat by her bedside just as he had weeks before. The machines hummed softly. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw him, her lips parted in a faint, trembling smile. "Danny," she whispered. He took her hand. "I know." Her smile faltered, tears forming. "He told you?" Daniel nodded. "Everything." She looked away, her chest rising unevenly. "He wasn't supposed to." "He had to," Daniel said softly. "We all did." For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind that stretches beyond words, where the truth finally stops running. Then she whispered, "Was he angry?" Daniel hesitated. "No, just tired." Elaine closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "He always carried too much." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You both did." The rain outside had stopped. Light fell across her face, soft and golden. For the first time, she looked peaceful. "I loved you both," she said. "I know," Daniel whispered, and when she drifted back to sleep, he sat there for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall, thinking about all the things love hides, and all the things it reveals too late. The machines hummed on, steady and indifferent, marking time in quiet, rhythmic pulses. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something close to forgiveness settling over him. Fragile, imperfect, but real. He didn't know what would come next. Maybe he'd sell the house. Maybe he'd stay. Maybe he'd go back to that lake one last time and leave the letter there, where it all began. But one thing he knew for certain: the truth doesn't set you free. It simply changes the shape of the cage, and maybe that was enough. When the screen fades to black, when the last word of his story settles into silence, there's one question that lingers, one that belongs not to Daniel, but to everyone listening. If you discovered the truth could destroy the people you love, would you protect their illusion? Or set it all on fire just to feel clean again? And deeper still, How much of who we are depends on the stories we're told? And what would remain of us if those stories were suddenly stripped away? Maybe the answer isn't in choosing between truth and love. Maybe it's in realizing that both can hurt, both can heal, and sometimes they are the same thing wearing different names. My best friend just achieved everything I've been working toward. My dream job, my dream city, my dream life. I'm proud of them, but also bitter in ways that scare me. They keep asking why I've been distant. I don't know how to admit I'm jealous without ruining the friendship. Can love and envy coexist? The city never really slept, but around 2:37 a.m., it did something quieter. It exhaled. The streets of concrete and glass loosened their shoulders. The hum of cars softened to a pulse, and a thin drizzle traced silver veins across the windows of an old apartment building tucked between two high-rises that had outgrown it. Inside, the glow of a laptop painted the room in ghost blue light. Evan sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers, old coffee cups, and the bones of abandoned resumes. The cursor blinked on a half-written cover letter, like it was tapping its foot, impatient. He'd rewritten the same paragraph 5 times, trying to sound confident without sounding desperate. But every version landed the same: flat, uncertain, transparent. The room smelled faintly of rain and burnt espresso. He hadn't realized he'd left the French press on the counter too long again. He leaned back against the couch, eyes unfocused, phone face down beside him. He wasn't avoiding calls exactly, just one in particular. Mara. His best friend since college. The person who had sat next to him in their first creative writing class. Both of them pretending not to notice the other scribbling notes faster than the professor could talk. They'd shared notebooks, dreams, even rejection letters. Each one a badge of their shared climb towards something that always felt just a little out of reach. Until now. Because 2 days ago, Mara got everything. A message from her at midnight. "I got it, Ev. The offer came through, New York. I start in 3 weeks." He'd stared at the text until the screen dimmed. Then he'd forced himself to type back, "That's amazing. You deserve it." And he meant it. Mostly. But beneath the warmth of pride, something else had slipped through, dark, sharp-edged, and shameful. It wasn't that she'd succeeded. It was that she'd succeeded first. That she was leaving. That she was stepping into his dream city. His dream job. The very one he'd applied for. The one that sent him a polite rejection 3 weeks ago. The cursor blinked again, waiting for him to continue. He closed the laptop. Silence, stretched. Then his phone buzzed. "Mara, you still up?" "Mara, I feel like you're mad at me." "Mara, can we talk?" Evan ran a hand through his hair, staring at the messages. His chest tightened, the kind of ache that comes not from what's been said, but what hasn't. He typed, deleted, retyped. Finally, he set the phone face down again and stood. The rain outside was heavier now. He walked to the window, resting his forehead against the glass, watching water streaks race each other down the pane. Across the street, a billboard flickered with the ad for a new tech startup. Dream. Build. Become. The irony almost made him laugh. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the last time he'd felt proud without also feeling small. The next morning, the city woke up all at once. The sound of garbage trucks, the smell of bakery bread from the shop downstairs, the low thrum of buses that always seemed 5 minutes late. Evan walked fast through it all, coffee in hand, earphones dangling, but no music playing. His office building stood at the edge of downtown, not shiny enough to be impressive, not old enough to be charming. He worked in marketing, the kind of job that looked good on paper but made his heart feel like it was shrinking a little each day. He rode the elevator with a handful of strangers, all staring at their phones, their reflections faint in the steel doors. When they opened on the 9th floor, Evan stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon cleaner. "Morning," someone said. He smiled back without seeing who. By 10 o'clock, he was lost in spreadsheets and social media calendars. His mind drifted. He imagined Mara packing boxes, sorting through her apartment, deciding which books to take and which to leave. He pictured her standing on the balcony of her new place in New York, the skyline behind her like a promise. He wondered if she'd think of him when she looked out at the lights. At lunch, he sat with a few coworkers, the kind of conversation where everyone laughed, just a little too loud. He tried to join in. When someone asked if he'd heard about Mara's job, he froze. "Yeah," he said, managing a smile. "She's been working toward that for years." "Man, that's awesome," his coworker said. "You two were, like, the same person in college, right?" "Something like that." They moved on to other topics, but the words stuck in his head. The same person. Maybe once, but not anymore. That night, Mara called. He almost didn't pick up, but the guilt made his thumb slide across the screen before he could stop himself. Her voice came bright and breathless. "Evan!" You picked up. "Hey," he said softly. "I was starting to think you were ghosting me." She laughed. But there was a crack in it. I don't know. You've been distant. Did I do something?" He hesitated. "No, you didn't. I've just been busy." "With what?" He looked around the room, at the empty takeout boxes, the unmade bed, the unopened rejection email still pinned in his inbox. "Work stuff," he said. Mara was quiet for a second. "Evan, I can tell when you're lying." He smiled faintly. "Then why ask?" She sighed. "Because I miss you, idiot." The silence stretched again. On her end, he could hear the faint clatter of packing tape, the shuffle of boxes. It sounded like she was already gone. "I'm happy for you, Mara," he said finally. She paused. "You don't sound happy." "I am," he insisted. "It's just change, you know?" "I'll visit," she promised. "And hey, maybe you'll end up there too. It's not like it's a closed door." He wanted to believe that. He wanted to imagine himself in that same city, catching up over coffee on some street corner near the Hudson, laughing about this awkward in-between. But deep down, something whispered, she'll move on. She'll meet people who matter more. She'll forget this version of you. When they hung up, he sat in the dark for a long time. The call had lasted 23 minutes. The ache lingered for hours. Over the next few weeks, things blurred. Mara's departure became a countdown he never asked for. Every time she texted an update, "Signed the lease. Got my first paycheck. You'd love this neighborhood." It hit like a pinprick to the heart. He started avoiding social media altogether, but avoidance never worked forever. One night, he scrolled without meaning to. Her latest post filled the screen. A picture of her on a rooftop, city lights wrapping around her like constellations. The caption read, "First week in the city. Feels like home already." His thumb hovered over the heart icon. Then he locked his phone. Across the room, the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. He walked to the bathroom, turned on the tap, splashed water on his face. When he looked up, the mirror caught him off guard. Dark circles, dull eyes, someone he didn't quite recognize. He thought about calling her, then didn't. He thought about deleting her number, then couldn't. So he did what he always did when the noise got too loud. He opened his laptop and started writing. It wasn't for work, not this time. It was a story about two friends who dreamed the same dream and what happened when only one of them got it. The words came slow at first, then faster. He wrote until dawn. When he finished, the city outside had turned gold with morning light. He sat there, fingers trembling, staring at the final line. Love can survive distance, but envy learns to live next door. Days turned into weeks. The story sat in a folder, unread. Life settled into its gray rhythm again. Work, sleep, repeat. Until one morning, his inbox pinged with a message from a small literary magazine he'd forgotten he even submitted to. "We loved your piece. We'd like to feature it in our next issue." He read it twice, then a third time. His hands shook. For the first time in months, something inside him cracked open. Not bitterness, not envy, but something gentler. Pride. He almost texted Mara right away. Almost. But before he could, his phone buzzed again. "Mara, hey. Weird question. You didn't happen to submit something to the Compass Review, did you?" His heart stopped. He typed, "Yeah." "Why?" she replied. "I just read a story there called Next Door. It's about us, isn't it?" He froze. She called seconds later. "Evan," she said, voice shaking. "Why would you write that?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Do you really think that's what I did to you? That I left you behind?" she asked. "It wasn't supposed to be about you," he whispered. "Then why did I recognize every line?" Silence flooded between them. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I just needed to make sense of it." "I wish you'd talk to me instead," she said, voice breaking. "I would have understood." And then she hung up. Evan sat there, the echo of her words clinging to the walls. Outside, the drizzle had returned. Soft, endless, indifferent. He stared at the empty screen, the cursor blinking like it was mocking him again. He had turned his feelings into fiction. And in doing so, he might have destroyed the one real thing that ever mattered. That night, he walked the city without destination. The rain blurred streetlights into halos, reflections swimming in puddles that swallowed the world upside down. Every step felt heavier than the last. He passed a bookstore, still open late, and paused. In the window display, a poster caught his eye. Local Authors Night, featuring Mara Quinn. He stood frozen, breath fogging the glass. So she was writing too. And she hadn't told him. A pulse of something dark stirred inside again. Not envy this time, but something colder. He stepped back, the rain soaking through his jacket, and whispered to himself, maybe this is how it ends. But somewhere deeper, beneath the ache, another thought took root. Or maybe this is how it begins. The night after he saw that poster, Evan couldn't sleep. He lay on his side, the city murmuring outside his window, the low hum of passing cars, a siren somewhere far off, the distant chatter of people walking home from late bars, the sound of life moving on. Mara's name glowed faintly on the bookstore poster burned into his mind. Featuring Mara Quinn. The letters seemed to whisper each time he closed his eyes. He told himself it shouldn't matter. People grew. They evolved. They built new lives. But something about it stung deeper than he expected. Maybe it wasn't jealousy this time. Maybe it was betrayal. Or maybe he just didn't know the difference anymore. He opened his laptop, pulled up her author page. It was small, a new publication, a short story. The title, The Leaving Season. He clicked it. The first line made his stomach twist. He said he was happy for me. But I could feel the crack in his voice when he lied. The story unfolded like a mirror held up to his own. Not word for word, but close enough that every sentence felt like it was breathing down his neck. She had taken their friendship and poured it into fiction, too. Her version was warmer, gentler, but unmistakably about him. About them. By the end, the protagonist, the version of her, walked away from her best friend with a bittersweet smile, whispering, "Sometimes love needs distance to survive." He stared at the last line until his eyes blurred. Then he closed the laptop, heart pounding. She had written her version of the truth, and the world would see hers first. The following week unfolded like a long inhale he couldn't release. Mara's story was being shared across literary circles, reposted by the magazine's followers, praised for its raw emotion and authenticity. Evan's own story, the one that came before, sat unnoticed, buried a few pages deeper into the publication. He told himself it didn't matter. Art wasn't a competition. But every time someone shared her piece, every time he saw her name trending on his feed, something inside him coiled tighter. At work, he found himself distracted. Numbers blurred. Conversations slipped past. When his boss called him into her office to ask about a campaign deadline, he blinked, realizing he hadn't even started. "You okay, Evan?" she asked, tilting her head. He nodded automatically. "Just tired." "Get some rest," she said. "You look like you've been running on fumes." He laughed softly, a sound without humor. "Yeah, something like that." That night, he walked home under flickering streetlights, the city heavy with fog. He passed the bookstore again, where a small crowd was gathered inside for the reading. Through the glass, he could see her, Mara, standing at the front, holding a microphone, her voice carried over the speakers. He froze outside, watching. Her hair was tied back loosely, the same way it always was when she was nervous. She smiled after each paragraph, eyes bright, voice trembling slightly, but steady enough to pull the room in. The audience hung on every word. Evan felt something shift in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or loss. He could have gone in. He almost did. But his feet wouldn't move. Instead, he turned away before she looked up, disappearing into the night. A week passed before he heard from her again. "Hey," she texted one morning. "Can we talk?" He stared at the message for nearly an hour before replying, "Sure." They met at a cafe near the old university campus, a neutral ground, a place layered with memories. When she arrived, she looked different. Not drastically, just more assured somehow. The kind of calm that comes from knowing where you're headed. She hugged him, but it felt tentative, like an echo of something that used to be natural. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, sitting across from him. "I wasn't sure either." She gave a small smile. "That's honest." For a moment, they just sat there, the sounds of espresso machines and soft jazz filling the gaps between words. "I read your story," she said finally. He nodded. "I figured." "It hurt," she admitted, "but it also made me sad, because I think I finally understood how lonely you've been." He looked up at her, eyes tired. "I didn't mean to make you the villain." "I know," she said softly. "But it's strange, isn't it? We both turned our friendship into fiction, like we were trying to explain each other to ourselves." He smiled faintly. "Writers are narcissists. We can't help it." She laughed quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe we're just scared to talk about real things without hiding behind a story." For a while, the tension softened. They talked about small things, her apartment, his work, the weather. But under it all, the air still carried something heavy and unsaid. When they stood to leave, she hesitated. "You know," she said, "I never meant to outshine you, or hurt you." "I know," he said. "Then stop acting like you lost something." He frowned. "I didn't." "You did," she interrupted gently. "You lost me. At least, the version of me you wanted to stay the same. And then she walked away, leaving him standing there with her coffee cup still half full on the table. That night, he couldn't shake her words. "You lost me." They repeated like static in his mind, pulling him back through every memory of them. Late night talks, shared notebooks, laughter over bad takeout. The small, invisible ways they had once kept each other grounded. He opened their old messages, scrolling through years of conversations. At the top of the thread was her first text ever to him. "You write like you're afraid the world will forget you." Maybe she'd been right all along. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen, and for the first time, he wondered if his jealousy wasn't about her success, but about his own stagnation. 2 months passed. Life steadied, or at least pretended to. Evan began working on a new project, something entirely different. Not about her, not about envy. A short novel set in a small coastal town, quiet, distant, safe. He poured himself into it, writing every night until the lines blurred between exhaustion and peace. He didn't speak to Mara much. They exchanged an occasional message, polite, distant, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves they're fine. Until one evening, his phone buzzed again. "Hey, I have a strange question." He frowned. "What's up?" "Did you ever send anyone that story, the first one, outside the magazine?" "No. Why?" "Because someone left a copy in my building lobby. Printed, folded, no note. Just my name on the envelope." Evan's pulse quickened. "That's weird. Maybe a fan." "Maybe," she replied. "But it wasn't the published version. It was your original draft." He froze. That version wasn't public. He'd only saved it on his laptop. "Are you sure?" he typed. "Positive," she wrote. "It even had your old notes in the margins." Evan's throat went dry. Someone had his draft. Someone who knew enough to print it, address it, and send it directly to her. "Did you tell anyone about it?" "No." "Should I be worried?" He hesitated. Probably just some mix-up. But long after the conversation ended, his mind wouldn't stop turning. His laptop hadn't left his apartment. His files were private. How would anyone get to them? Over the next week, small things started to feel off. He'd come home to find his desk chair slightly moved. His coffee mug shifted from the right side of the sink to the left. His browser history cleared, even though he hadn't done it. At first, he brushed it off. Exhaustion, forgetfulness. But then he noticed something stranger. One night, while working late, he opened his manuscript folder. And there it was. A new file. Dated that day. The title, Draft 2, by M. He stared at it, confused. He hadn't written it. When he opened it, his stomach twisted. It was his story, rewritten. The same characters, same structure, but the ending was different. This version ended with the narrator discovering a hidden recording of every conversation he'd ever had with the woman. A story within a story. At the bottom of the document was a single line. Sometimes the truth rewrites itself. He slammed the laptop shut. His heart pounded in his chest. It had to be her. It had to be Mara. Maybe as some strange joke or a message or something else entirely. But how had she gotten into his files? He picked up his phone and called her. Straight to voicemail. He called again. Nothing. The rain had started again outside, pattering against the window like fingers tapping. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the closed laptop. Then from his hallway, he heard something. A soft creak, like someone stepping on the old floorboard near the door. He froze. The sound didn't come again. But when he finally gathered the courage to check, he found a thin white envelope on the floor, slipped under the door frame. No address, no stamp. Just one word written across the front in delicate handwriting. Rewrite. Inside, a single printed page. It was the last paragraph of his story, rewritten again. He thought envy was the monster, but it was only the mirror. The paper trembled in his hands. Somewhere in the city, maybe only a few blocks away, Mara was writing her truth again. Or maybe someone else was. Either way, something had shifted between fiction and reality. And Evan was no longer sure which side he was living on. The city had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe it was only Evan who had. Every building he passed now felt unfamiliar, as though the skyline itself had rewritten its own architecture while he wasn't looking. Each window glowed with lives that seemed to belong to someone else, stories he could watch but never enter. It had been 4 days since the envelope. 4 days since the sound in the hallway. 4 days of no response from Mara. Her silence was louder than anything. He checked his phone constantly. Texts, emails, voicemails. Nothing. He searched her social media. The last post was from a week ago. Revisions are strange things. They change more than just stories. The comments were full of congratulations, praise, admiration. But to Evan, every word felt like a code he couldn't decipher. He tried to focus on work, but everything there felt irrelevant, hollow. Each ad campaign he wrote sounded like an imitation of itself. Every pitch like a loop of old dialogue. His boss noticed. "You look like you're somewhere else," she said. "Maybe I am," he answered. That night, as rain brushed against the city like whispers, he decided to confront her. Her new apartment was on the east side, a modern building of glass and white stone, with a lobby that smelled faintly of rain and new paint. The elevator reflected his face back at him, tired, pale, uncertain. He rehearsed what he would say. He would ask her directly about the envelope, the file, the rewrite. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it wasn't her at all. When the elevator opened on the 10th floor, he walked down a hallway lined with framed prints, all abstract, all blue. The air was still. He found her door. Apartment 1003, he knocked. Nothing. He waited, then knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. He was about to turn away when he noticed something. The door was slightly ajar. A thin line of light spilled across the hallway floor. He hesitated, then pushed gently. Inside, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. "Mara?" he called softly. No answer. He stepped inside, eyes darting to the half-packed boxes, the open notebooks on the coffee table. Her laptop sat on the counter, lid open, the screen still glowing. "Mara?" he said again. Then he saw it. A printed manuscript on the table, neatly stacked. His name was on the cover page. "Next Door," by Evan Cole. He froze. The pages were covered in red ink. Notes, comments, revisions. Not hers, not handwriting he recognized. Some notes were circled repeatedly. He doesn't see it yet. The story rewrites itself. Keep watching. His breath came shallow. Then, from somewhere deeper in the apartment, a floorboard creaked. He turned. At the end of the hallway stood Mara. But she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were wide, tired, red from lack of sleep. She looked at him like someone seeing a ghost. "Evan," she said softly, "you shouldn't be here." "I tried calling you," he said. "You didn't answer. I know." "What is this?" He gestured to the manuscript. "Why are there notes all over my story? Who's doing this?" She looked down, then back up at him. "You don't remember, do you?" "Remember what?" She walked closer. Her voice trembled. "The first version. The real one." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" You sent me a draft, she said, months ago, before any of this. You asked me to edit it. He shook his head. No, I didn't. Yes, you did, she interrupted, voice rising. You asked me what I thought about the ending. You said you wanted it to feel real. His mind raced. He tried to recall. There were so many versions, so many nights lost between rewrites and half sleep. Maybe he had sent her one. Maybe he'd forgotten. I sent you the file, she continued, and I told you it felt too real, that it sounded like something you were planning, not writing. Evan's stomach turned cold. Planning what? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the stack of papers, flipping to the final page. This is your handwriting, Evan. You wrote this last line. He looked. The words were scrawled in pen, jagged and uneven. When she finally leaves, I'll make sure the story never does. He stared at it. I don't remember writing that. I think you do, she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, the city dissolving behind the window glass. Finally, she said, You need to go. Mara, please. Her voice cracked. I don't want to be afraid of you. The words hit like a blade. He took a step back, chest tight. I would never... I know, she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes, but you don't see it anymore. You don't see how deep it's gotten. The jealousy, the rewriting. You're living inside the story now. He stood frozen. Something about her fear didn't feel like theater. It felt like truth. I didn't leave that envelope, he said quietly. I swear. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face. Then she nodded slightly, though her hand still trembled. Maybe not. But someone did. And I think it started with you. He turned to leave, but before he stepped out, she said, Evan, if you start hearing things or seeing pages you didn't write, don't read them. He met her eyes one last time. Why? Because some stories write you back. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment with every light on, the laptop closed, the envelope still on the table like a warning. At 2:11 a.m., a soft ding echoed from his computer. A notification. The file Draft 2 by M had been modified. He hadn't touched it. Slowly, he opened the laptop. The file name was different now. Draft 3 by E.M. His hands shook as he clicked it open. The story was there, his story, her story, merged together, alternating paragraphs in two different voices. His written in his familiar tone, hers woven in like an echo. But near the end, new text appeared, written in neither of their styles. He tried to undo what had already begun, but stories don't forget who writes them. He scrolled faster. At the very bottom, a final line appeared, just one sentence. Look up. He froze. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Slowly, he lifted his head. In the reflection of the laptop screen, he saw movement behind him. Faint, almost imperceptible, like someone stepping away from the window. He spun around. The balcony door was cracked open, the curtains swaying gently. The rain blew in, cold against his face. He stepped closer, heart hammering. The city stretched below, lights smeared by fog. There was no one there. Only a folded page pinned beneath the balcony handle. He reached for it with trembling fingers. It was torn from a notebook. His notebook. Across the top, in black ink, one final message. The ending is yours, Evan. But make it count. The paper slipped from his hands and drifted out into the rain. He watched it fall until it vanished among the streetlights below. Morning came pale and silent. Evan's apartment looked untouched, normal again, as if the night before had never happened. He sat by the window watching the city wake. The sky was gray, the streets wet. A delivery truck honked somewhere far off. His laptop sat closed on the table, quiet now. He thought of calling Mara, of apologizing, of asking if she'd seen anything strange too. But he didn't. Maybe she was right. Maybe some stories weren't meant to be read again. He opened a blank document instead. For a moment, his fingers hovered over the keys. Then he began to type. Sometimes, we confuse love with reflection. We think we're seeing someone else, but really, we're staring at the unfinished parts of ourselves. He paused, then added another line. Every writer becomes the ghost of their own story eventually. He stopped there, saved the file, closed the laptop. Outside, the rain began again, soft, endless, cleansing. He stood, walked to the window, and whispered to the city below, not sure if it was to Mara or to himself. Maybe envy was never about wanting what someone else had. Maybe it was about losing who I was without them. Later that day, his phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. No text, just an attachment. A file named Draft 4, the final edit. He stared at it for a long time. Then quietly, he smiled and didn't open it. When night came again, the city exhaled, the same way it had at the beginning, the same rhythm, the same rain. Somewhere between two windows facing each other across the skyline, two writers sat in silence, both wondering which of them was the author now. The cursor blinked, patient, waiting for whoever would write the next line. As the rain fades and the story closes, ask yourself, where does envy end and identity begin? Can love survive when admiration turns to comparison? If you saw your own life rewritten through someone else's eyes, would you recognize yourself? Or would the story tell a truth you've been avoiding? And in the end, when we write about the people we love, are we preserving them or replacing them?